Chapter 935. The two dragons were fighting in the sky above Greystone Town. The shockwaves from the clash of the laws had destroyed more than half of the town in an instant. Several streets were engulfed in flames, and the fire spread further and further with the help of the wind. More buildings had collapsed, and the streets were filled with cracks like broken waves. It was as if the town had experienced a terrible earthquake. It took Sunil a lot of effort to drag the elf out of the center of the battle. Suddenly, a spear-like object flew towards her. Sunil let out a scream and hurriedly let go of the elf. The spear flew between the two of them, and the elf was thrown to the ground. Sunil let out a cry of pain and finally woke up in a daze. Malta spat fire in the air. The fireball hit Mithril's wings and exploded into sparks. The silver dragon roared in pain and rolled for nearly 100 meters before regaining her balance. Another fireball brushed past her tail and hit a wooden house near the center of the battle. The scorching air and the shockwave of the explosion blew the elf, who had just gotten up from the ground, a few somersaults. She flew across the ruins of a house and was finally stopped by something stuck in the ground. The elf covered her red forehead with tears in her eyes as she got up from the ground. She opened her mouth slightly and found that the thing that stopped her was a silver spear stuck in the ground. The spear didn't look like an ornament in a noble house. Even after such a violent explosion, it didn't leave a single scratch on it. The spear was shining with a silver light. From top to bottom, the spear was engraved with scenes from heaven to hell. Clouds and light, holy and beautiful, naked angels, ugly demons and original sins, and the flames of hell. On the shaft of the spear was a pair of angel wings made of mithril. The spear was stuck in the ground upside down. The blade was flat and 4 fingers wide like a sharp sword. The edge of the blade was as clean as new, as if it had just been quenched in a forge. Treasure. The little elf's eyes immediately emitted a dazzling brilliance. For a moment, she even forgot about the danger above her head. She quickly stretched out her hands to pull the spear out of the stone slab. Unfortunately, her small body was not even 2/3 the height of the spear. Even after using all her strength, she could not move it at all. But at this time, a crystal-like icicle shot from the top of her head and hit her wide cloak. The impact of the icicle directly pulled the little elf up from the ground with a scream. Together with her spear, she was directly dragged out and nailed to a nearby wooden stake. Damn thief! The young man next to the Prime Minister's daughter appeared from the second floor of a nearby building, his body covered in injuries. He bared his fangs and brandished his claws at the little elf. "You are the thief!" The little elf was very angry and immediately retorted, "The little elf is Nightingale." Then she desperately tried to pull out the icicle above her head. That icicle had nailed her cloak to a crooked wooden stake, hanging her in midair. She twisted and turned for a long time, but her short little hand still couldn't reach the icicle. She was so anxious that her little face turned red. Seeing this scene, Ev couldn't help but laugh. "Who told you to be stubborn?" He raised his right hand. A ball of ice was floating in the middle of his palm, and then he shouted at the little elf, "Quickly put down the thing in your hand and I will spare your life." The little elf was a little scared, but she was even more angry. She pulled her lower eyelid with her index finger, stuck out her tongue at him and made a face. "No way! You deserve to die," Ev shouted, flustered and exasperated. He reached out his hand and was about to cast a spell. "Shieni, don't wait, quickly catch him," the little elf hurriedly shouted. Ev was startled and hurriedly looked back, but behind him was a dark room, and there was no sign of Shieni. He immediately realized that he had been fooled, and when he turned his head, he found that there was only an empty cloak left on the wooden stake. The little elf had already drilled out of the cloak and ran far away. The young man immediately felt that his intelligence had been severely damaged. He was so angry that he didn't care that he was a weak elementalist, and directly jumped down from the second floor. He screamed as he fell, and only then did he limp up from the ground. He gritted his teeth and chased after the little elf. At this time, Solens came out from the other side of the ruins. Seeing his companion in such a sorry state, he couldn't help but ask in surprise, "Ev, what happened to you? Did you see the young mistress?" "I don't know where the young mistress is either." Ev gnashed his teeth and shouted, "Quickly catch that damned brat. She stole our demon slayer spear." Solens was shocked. The Demon Slayer spear was the family heirloom of the Floyds. Count Floyd had only lent it to them because his mistress was the fiancée of Viscount Elman Floyd. If it was stolen, the reputation of the Prime Minister's family would be ruined. He hurriedly unsheathed his two-handed sword and chased after the little elf. When the little elf turned back and saw that there was one more person chasing after her, and one of them was the ferocious-looking fellow who had caught Xianni, she couldn't help but be scared out of her wits. Inwardly, she complained that Xianni hadn't come to save her yet. She ran for her life until she was out of breath. She was gasping for air, her face pale. Suddenly, she heard the sound of wind coming from the darkness. It sounded like the sound of wings flapping. She became alert and shouted happily, "Xianni, you're here to save me. Don't think this trick will work again." When Eve heard the little elf repeat her old trick, he was almost angered to death. She simply looked down on him too much. In any case, he was also a dignified magician, not one of those rude and ignorant barbarian beasts on the border. A fireball had already appeared in his hand, and he was ready to blow the little elf up. Solens grabbed him and said, "Careful, there's something up ahead. Don't listen to her nonsense." Eve was about to go crazy. He pushed Solens away and said, "She," but the latter half of his sentence was drowned out by a sharp whistle. His eyes widened. Suddenly he saw a pair of huge fleshy wings in the darkness ahead of him, followed by a terrifying face. Under the two pairs of huge horns, there were long and narrow emerald-like eyes shining fiercely. On top of the thick black scales, there were horny bone plates that looked like a swarm of bees. Strong and powerful limbs, sharp claws, and a huge bloody mouth that was filled with golden flames. Dragon! The young man didn't even have time to say a word before he was completely submerged in a sea of fire. Solens watched as his companion's skin peeled off in front of him, revealing burning muscles, bones, and internal organs. Then the blood evaporated and turned into ashes. He was stunned for a moment. The terrifying monster spat out flames and swept across the sky, turning the whole street into a sea of fire. In the dark night, many such dragon beasts were descending from the sky. They spiraled into Greystone Town and spat out fireballs to set the streets ablaze. They whistled as they flew over the fire, creating a hellish scene. "Get out of my way!" Brando roared. The icy blue sword in his hand flashed with a long and narrow light, and a dragon beast that was charging at him was cut in half. He carried Cooper and moved forward without any hindrance. The dragon beast that was cut in half fell to the sides and crashed into the buildings on both sides. Like a cannonball, the buildings made of wood and stone collapsed. Cooper looked at the scene with his mouth agape. He finally had a clear understanding of the Count's strength. That was a ridgetop dragon, a grade 7 creature of Georgandy Ridge. It couldn't even withstand a single blow from Brando. Brando walked on the street filled with blood. The frost chant Senna in his hand dripped with the same color. Behind him was a sea of fire, and the golden flame shone brightly on the river of blood. Walton followed behind him with mixed feelings. Count Alcorn and the other nobles of Cruz who were rescued from the tomb were behind him. Except for the Count, who was over 50 years old and still looked calm, most of the others were trembling in fear. From time to time they would look up at the two dragons fighting in the sky. From time to time, there would be flaming harpies falling from above, leaving long flaming trails behind them. Sometimes there would be screaming cavemen fleeing in all directions. But no one cared. Everyone thought they were crazy, but no one dared to fall half a step behind. "How far is it?" "You can see it when you turn the corner." Someone among the nobles suddenly screamed. Brando looked up and saw the silver dragon falling from the sky. Medisha pushed away the collapsed wall with a crash. She coughed loudly and shouted in the smoke, "Miss Roman, Your Highness, are you okay?" After a moment a weak voice replied, "I'm fine, Sister Medisha." Two figures walked out from behind the smoke, one tall and one short. The tall one was Medusa Lysimeka. She had a bloody wound on her arm, while the little prince was unharmed. "Where's the Roman?" "I didn't see her." "Where's Miss Chiara?" "Princess Magadol." "I'm fine." The nun princess replied softly. Cries could be heard in the darkness. Some were dead, some were injured. Everyone stood up weakly and tried to find the nearest person. Medisha quickly found Eek, Sergeant Marjorie, Duke's daughter Eugenie, Dilfrey and her knight Nia. Enid and Judith, and finally Nasha. The others also gathered together one after another. Other than Marjorie, who was slightly injured, the knight of the inner court was the most seriously injured. A sharp shard pierced her lung. When she was found, she was already unconscious and had a fever. She was mumbling something in a daze. The nobles of Cruz suffered heavy losses. 7 or 8 of them died. Some of them were missing an arm or a leg. If they did not receive timely treatment, they would not live for more than a few days. Most of the others were also injured. Most of them were depressed, and many even fell into despair. After counting the number of people, Medisha found that Roman and Chiara could not be found. The latter was fine, but the former was the fiancé of the Lord and one of her few human friends. She panicked and ordered everyone to spread out to find the whereabouts of the merchant lady and the king's eldest son's sister. But in the end, they got a clue from the sobbing daughter of the Grinoires family. Before the explosion, Sister Roman and Sister Chiara were in front of me. The little girl replied softly, sobbing. Following that, the others began to recall the scene one after another. Bloomfield, the deputy commander of the Solstice Knights, found the place where Roman and Chiara were last seen according to everyone's description. They dug up the rubble and found a dark hole below. This is a secret passage. Bloomfield was stunned for a moment before he reacted. Are Sister Roman and the others down there? The little prince asked worriedly. It's sealed down there. Medusa's prismatic vertical pupils shone in the darkness. She only glanced at the secret passage and replied indifferently. Medisha did not speak. She was an undead, and darkness was no obstacle for her. What Lasmika could see was naturally not difficult for her. Find a way to dig it out, she replied. A hand pressed down on her hand in the darkness. Medisha was slightly startled. She turned around and saw the Duke's daughter looking at her with bright eyes. Miss Medisha, we can't do that. The nobles of Cruz are very emotional and can cause trouble at any time. The injured also need to be treated. This is the center of the battlefield. There are 2 dragons. We can't stay here for long. I don't know what the commander told you, but we have to move now. Medisha's eyes showed hesitation, and she gently bit her lower lip. The battle outside didn't stop for even a moment. The fire continued to spread, and from time to time, golden rays of light would seep in from the cracks of the ruins. The dry wood crackled in the flames, and the temperature was rising every moment. The dragon flew over the streets, causing the already shaky buildings to creak, as if they would collapse at any moment. In such an environment, everyone's nerves were stretched tight. Injury and despair could make people collapse at any time and do unreasonable things. Brando had also ordered her to return to the portal, but the problem was, what about Miss Roman? Eugenie said again, let Mr. Eckert and Her Royal Highness take the others and move. I will stay with you to find Miss Roman. Medisha looked at her in surprise. Miss Eugenie, you? Miss Medisha, you are that person's subordinate, and I am a member of the diplomatic team. I will stay and represent Erwin's diplomatic team. This is my duty. The Duke's daughter calmly replied. Don't worry, I will never accept the reputation of the diplomatic team abandoning their members to escape alone. I'll stay too. Petty Officer Marjorie suddenly replied. The Duke's daughter turned around and glared at him in annoyance. Miss Medisha, I alone will be enough. Medisha looked at the two, especially Marjorie's wound, and couldn't help but smile. If that's the case, I'm afraid Mr. Marjorie won't agree. Then let's do as Miss Eugenie says. Leave the outside matters to Mr. Eckert and Commander Bloomfield. We will stay and look for Miss Roman and Miss Chiara. In the darkness, Eugenie and Marjorie's faces blushed when they saw the silver elf princess's teasing gaze. The little elf opened her mouth wide and looked up at the group of dragons flying over her head. After the dragons flew past and turned Effie into ashes, they circled around in the air and then slowly landed in front of her. They flapped their wings twice and landed heavily on the ground. They stared at this little dot with ominous glints in their eyes. The little elf covered the dust with her hands and coughed. She looked at the big guy through the gaps between her fingers. After a while she asked in surprise, "How did you become so big?" The dragon beast shook its huge head and slowly approached her. It seemed to have noticed that the other party was not afraid at all. Suddenly, it felt that its dignity had been challenged. It spread its wings and let out a deafening roar at the little thing. The little elf screamed and covered her ears, as if she was shivering in a storm. She closed her eyes and angrily shouted, "How dare you shout at me, Judy? I will never talk to you again. You are so bad." This time it was the dragon beast's turn to be puzzled. The dragon beast was a race of inferior dragons, but it was slightly more intelligent than the viper dragons. Even with its huge brain, it couldn't understand why this little thing dared to yell at it. If it could, it almost wanted to scratch its head, wondering how this little thing could pose a threat to it, and why it dared to stand in front of it so fearlessly. But the dragon was not a race with true intelligence, so it couldn't understand the cause and effect of this. It couldn't figure it out for a while, so it decided to follow its primitive instinct and spit out a flame towards the little elf. In its simpler logic, if it burned to death, then it was an enemy it could provoke, and if it couldn't burn to death, then it had to consider making way. A wisp of flame from the ridged dragon beast was just a fireball the size of a small house for the little elf, but when she saw the golden flame pressing towards her, she was stunned. Judy wanted to kill her. "Little elf, you're a complete idiot. How is that ugly, stupid, and dull fellow like me?" With a shriek, a black shadow flew out of nowhere and headbutted the little elf. Then the two of them rolled into a ball and rolled out of the range of the fireball. With a loud bang, the fireball hit the ground and exploded. Scorching hot air swept across the street, and the two guys rolling together were sent flying several meters away by the shockwave. Only then did they come to a stop amidst a series of screams. The little elf tearfully hugged the thing that hit her and said happily, "Judy, I knew you wouldn't kill me. You are so good. Get out of here, you naughty brat." Judy angrily swept her tail across the little elf's face. P.S. Friends who have been following Amber for a long time, there are only 2 days left until I achieve my record of 3 months of continuous updates. Your encouragement is my motivation for writing. The more votes, the better. Chapter 936. The outcome of the battle in the air was decided at this moment. Silver Dragon Mithril's body was not at an advantage to begin with, and the injuries from before had seriously affected her speed. After being hit repeatedly, she finally could not hold on any longer, and her movements were obviously delayed for a moment. The huge black dragon took the opportunity to swing her tail from above and hit Mithril's waist. Mithril let out a cry and fell from the sky with wounds all over her body. She crashed to the ground, and her huge body flattened several streets in an instant. At that moment, Greystone Town seemed to let out a cry of pain. The ground sank layer by layer in all directions, and the houses collapsed one after another. The falling Mithril pushed forward on the ground, and the remaining momentum did not dissipate. Large and small buildings were crushed under her body, and half of Greystone Town was destroyed like a bulldozer. She was about to reach the street where Rove's compass was located. Erwin's envoy group, who was preparing to move, felt the world collapse. Everyone lost their footing and fell to the ground. Amidst the chaos and screams, the people near the windows watched in despair as a shadow pressed down on them. The scene looked very much like a tsunami, except that it was replaced by a broad silver back. Rows of houses collapsed under the back of this back, and then they were sucked in. When the last row of buildings collapsed, the shadow of death was almost in front of them. The nobles panicked and left the buildings like ants, fleeing in all directions. But how could they be faster than a falling dragon? Running away was just to delay the time of death for a moment. A terrifying creaking sound came from the house. One of the walls had completely collapsed under the pressure. Enaid, who was under the wall, was already scared stiff. This count's daughter stood there in a daze. She even forgot to dodge when she saw this scene. "Enaid, dodge!" Eugenie shouted. The latter was indifferent. Medisha rushed out at the critical moment. "Wings of spirituality!" she shouted, and a grayish-white net spread out from both sides of her body. The flashing hexagonal structure formed the shape of wings. The silver elven princess clenched her teeth and waved, and the tips of the wings on both sides bent towards the middle, blocking the collapsing wall in front of Enaid. The wall was smashed into pieces and the ground rumbled. In an instant, Mithril's back broke through the wall and collided with Medisha's wings. Medisha let out a whimper. She had indirectly blocked the power of the black dragon Malthus, which came from the full power of the sage. Even though much of it had dissipated, it was still not something her law could withstand. The moment the wings supported Mithril's body, The hexagonal structure immediately began to bend and deform, and then revealed white cracks. The fire of the soul. Arg! Enide seemed to have just woken up. Medisha! The Count's daughter shouted in panic. At this time a second person finally rushed out. It was Eek. Miss Medisha, let me help you. Then the White Lion Knights, followed by Marjorie, the deputy commander of the Summer Solstice Knight Regiment, Bloomfield, and the rest of the Summer Solstice Knights. Everyone rushed up and used all their strength to block Mithril's back. But other than Bloomfield, the strength of humans was so weak in front of a battle of this level that everyone was sent flying. Nia! Dilfri's forehead was full of cold sweat. She reminded loudly, "Hold me." "Miss, you can't." Dilfri had already put her hand on her chest. Dark spells flashed on her snow-white arm one after another. She reached out and pointed at the broad back of the silver dragon. Black flames seemed to burn from her chest. It burned fiercely and formed the upper body of a huge demon. The demon howled and waved its arms, pushing Mithril's back heavily. The power of this blow was so strong that even the silver wall trembled slightly. It was a spell, Banuk's Claw. This demonic spell could instantly summon the power of the seventh lord of the Sulphur River, Banuk, the king of the Black Fire Abyss. But like all other demonic spells, the backlash was just as strong. Dilfri was already weak, and now she vomited blood and fainted directly. Her spell finally worked. Medisha's pressure was relieved a little, and she finally had time to cast a spell. Inspire! The Planeswalker's Law was activated. Bright white light rose from everyone nearby. Medisha's broken wings were about to solidify in this white light, and Mithril's momentum finally slowed down. Just a little more. Eek shouted loudly. The Silver Elf Princess could only tremble. The power of the dragon seemed to be endless, and it made her feel almost hopeless. At this time a hand appeared beside her out of thin air. The hand gently pressed on the silver dragon's back, and the whole space seemed to tremble slightly. Countless silver lines spread out from the point of contact between the hand and the silver dragon's back. These lines intertwined with each other and shone faintly, forming a huge net. Mithril crashed into the net, and at that moment, a sharp wind formed into a sharp whistling sound. The silver net shone with a dazzling light, but that was all. Everyone was surprised to see Mithril slowly come to a stop. Medisha completely relaxed the moment she saw the hand. It was as if all the strength in her body had been sucked out. Her body went limp, and she almost fell to her knees. Before she fell, a hand supported her, and then Brando's face appeared in her vision. The latter looked at the sky with a cold face, and then looked down at the little princess who was summoned by him. "My lord." The Silver Elf Princess was so weak that she could barely speak. "Didn't I ask you to leave early?" Brando looked at Medisha's injuries with some heartache. But more than that, he was angry. "But Miss Roman, she's fine." Brando interrupted her and said, "Come, let's take the others and leave this place first." Medisha was slightly stunned. She saw a hamster standing on Brando's shoulder. The hamster's appearance was very ordinary, but the breath of the soul was very familiar. She widened her eyes and said, "White Mist, how did you become like this?" White Mist snorted softly, obviously disdaining to answer the question. Seeing White Mist, Medisha knew that Roman was probably out of danger. White Mist was most likely a messenger. She sighed in relief and nodded weakly to Brando. Regarding Medisha's condition, Brando frowned. He held the little princess and asked softly, "Can you still stand in your current condition?" Medisha's face was slightly red. The fire of the soul in her body was quite serious. This was similar to a living person who had exhausted their physical strength, but she still nodded gently. Brando sighed and said, "Don't try to be brave." After saying that, he bent down and put his hand through the little princess's knees and directly carried her up. Medisha immediately raised her head and smiled at Brando, who was holding her. "Thank you, my lord. You're much more generous than Amandina," Brando said in surprise. "After all, I am the commander of the Silver Elves, my lord," Medisha said in her heart. She was starting to feel very tired. She gently leaned her head on her lord's chest and closed her eyes, falling into a deep sleep. Brando looked at the silver elven girl in his arms and sighed. He told Medisha that he would take the others away, but that was only a consolation. The battle between the two dragons had completely destroyed Greystone Town. Now that they had nowhere to hide, they could only hope that the silver dragon would continue to attract Malthus's attention. But lying in the ruins, Mithril tried to stand up a few times, but in the end she fell back down heavily. Malthus looked down at Greystone Town coldly from the sky. Noticing the puny humans below, he did not want to do it himself. He only signaled for the rich dragons to circle down and surround the pitiful creatures in his eyes. Brando saw this scene and felt that he was unlucky. He thought of a way to escape while he had Cooper gather the nobles of Cruz. He also had Eek bring the injured away first. He turned around and unsheathed his sword at the same time as Maynard, facing the dragons in the sky. These dragons were nothing to him, but he knew how prideful dragons were. Malthus might not want to deal with them personally, but he would not let them escape. It was not hard to imagine how difficult it would be to escape under the watchful eyes of an adult dragon. There was only one thing he could do now. He subconsciously looked at the wounded silver dragon Mithril. "Human, we need to work together." At this moment, a voice sounded in their minds. Brando was a little surprised. He did not expect Mithril to have the same idea as him. In his impression, the pride of the dragons would not allow them to lower themselves like this. He looked up and met Mithril's gaze. There was a gentle light in the silver dragon's mercury-like eyes. Mithril was covered in blood. The scales on her back and wings were a mess of flesh and blood. She panted heavily and said softly, "Malthus will not let you go, human. Help me buy some time. As long as I can fly, I can find a way to lure him away." Buy time? Brando was a little confused. He looked up at Malthus. That was a dragon. His teacher Mephisto might be able to do it, but he was not even enough to fill the gap between Malthus' teeth. "I don't think I can do it, esteemed lady." Brando could only answer honestly. Mithril shook her head and suddenly said, "No, I think you can do it. I have seen the same power as you in someone. About 1,000 years ago, I saw that person in the Silver Sea. At that time, he was just a young wizard among the Bugas. Do you know who he is now?" Brando of course knew who that person was. That name was probably known by everyone in Wonde. He did not expect the dragon lady to compare him to that person. He did not know if it was a compliment. In the sky, a swarm of dragons was flying in their direction. "I really can't buy time for you, esteemed lady. This is not a game I can participate in." Brando shook his head. As he spoke, he took out a strange dial from his pocket. "But I think there is room for us to work together." "The elapsing needle," Mithril exclaimed. "You really didn't misjudge me." Brando looked at the sky. "Now there is another problem. The elapsing needle can only accelerate me and the creatures or objects I come into contact with. How do I get to your side without attracting that guy's attention? It's better to be fast. My people can't stop those dragons." "That's easy," Mithril replied. She moved slightly on the ruins, and her huge wings drooped down to cover Brando. "I can only accelerate time for you for about 5 minutes. Is that enough, esteemed lady?" Brando did some calculations. If he carried Mithril with him for 5 minutes, he would lose at least 2 levels. But at this time he had no choice. The silver dragon did some calculations and nodded. "It's a little less, but I think it's enough for me to recover." Brando nodded. Time was limited, so he did not waste any more time. He placed his hand on Mithril's wings and activated the elapsing needle. The draconic beasts had already arrived, and what greeted them were gargoyles. The gargoyles shrieked as they launched a suicidal attack on the top-tier air force. The difference in strength between the two sides was so great that the moment they clashed, the gargoyles' mutilated corpses fell like rain. Malthus looked on with interest. He did not expect the humans to have the means to resist, but that was all. He was not worried that these pitiful creatures could change the outcome of the battle. On the battlefield, the Shia Knight and the White Lion Guards quickly joined the battle. On the other side of the battlefield, other people were also facing the threat of the dragons. Shieni and the little fairies dodging completely enraged the Ridgeback Drake. It let out an earth-shattering roar and flapped its wings, stirring up a gust of wind as it pounced towards the two of them. It no longer played the game of cat and mouse. Instead, it opened its gaping maw and bit towards the little fairy. The little elf and Sydney screamed at the same time. They scrambled to their feet, turned around and ran, but their movements were no match for the gigantic dragon. The dragon roared angrily, and the pungent breath from its mouth blew the two of them off balance. The little elf was so scared that she started crying. Her legs gave way, and she tripped over herself. She turned around and saw the rows of white teeth in the dragon's mouth. She screamed and closed her eyes, and raised her small hands to protect herself. "Mom! There's a monster that wants to eat me!" The elf screamed. Suddenly, she felt a slight heat in her palms, as if there was a powerful force coming from the front. The counterforce blew her off the ground and sent her flying for more than 10 meters before she fell face first on the ground. The elf looked up dumbfounded. Her face was covered in dirt and mud. Her forehead was red, and she even had a nosebleed. But her eyes were wide open as she looked in front of her. There, a headless dragon was on the verge of collapse. Its neck seemed to have been cut off by something, leaving only a charred hole. Rotten flesh, bones and broken organs could be seen in the hole. Dirty blood spurted out like lava, covering the entire street. The headless dragon staggered forward a few steps before it fell heavily to the ground. The sound of the dragon beast falling to the ground was so loud that the little elf trembled on the ground. The elf stared blankly at the dragon's body, then at her own hands. Finally, her eyes fell on the spear that she had been holding tightly. Her mouth was wide open and she couldn't close it. At this time, Xianni finally flapped her wings and flew back to the former's side. She was obviously scared out of her wits. She had only seen a flash of white light, and then the behemoth had been beheaded. She didn't know what had happened, so she shouted, "What happened? What was that? Damn elf, did you steal the bow of the world again?" No, the elf hurriedly explained. "It's this." Both of their eyes fell on the spear. The silver spear was slightly different from before. The top part of the pattern on the spear was shining and had turned into a conspicuous golden color. "What's this?" Sydney asked. "I don't know." The elf shook her head blankly. "But a bad guy said that it belonged to them." "Bad guy? Those bad guys who came to catch you," the elf said indignantly. "I see." Sydney suddenly realized. She spread her wings and flew around the elf's head. She answered excitedly, "This is the Demon Slayer spear they were talking about." Demon Slayer spear? The elf had never heard of this name before. "I've read about it in the legends of the Cruise people. This is the spear of the legendary knight Sir Floyd. He used this spear to fight in hell. The spear was stained with the blood of demons. This spear is a genuine subdivine weapon." Sydney said enviously, "You're so lucky, little elf. How did you manage to use it?" "I don't know. I was so scared at that time, just like this." Before she could finish her words, the spear in her hand suddenly trembled. A thin white line extended from the tip of the spear and pointed to the street in front of them. The two looked up at the same time. P.S. Looking for monthly votes. Chapter 938. Protect that silver dragon. Don't let them get close to her. The battle in the sky was reaching its climax. The draconic beasts circled around Mithril's gigantic body. They flew lower and lower, circling like low-hanging dark clouds. Only the female knight's voice could be heard clearly above the din of the battlefield. Under her command, the stone statues began to move. The gargoyles continued to attack the dragon beasts. It was as if two dark clouds were violently colliding with each other. There was no loud bang, but there was a mixture of golden flames instead of lightning and thunder. The remains of the gargoyles fell down like rain, and from time to time, a huge monster would fall from the sky and crash to the ground. The ground trembled from time to time. When the silver dragon Mithril landed, it had turned the nearby streets into flat ruins. However, there was still a circle of surviving buildings around the empty area. The Knights of the Solstice Knights and the White Lion Guards climbed up these buildings and helped the gargoyles fight on the roofs. They built a temporary and stable line of defense. At least for the time being, they could still hold the dragon back. They blocked the periphery of the ruins. Their casualties were also heavy. From time to time, fireballs would fall from the sky and hit these isolated buildings. A dazzling fire would rise in the darkness, often representing the loss of several lives. The little prince and the weak nobles had already been moved to a safer place by Dilfrey and Princess Magadol, leaving only a few who still dared to fight. Eek and Yuta temporarily assumed the position of commander of the White Lion Guards, taking over the position of the unconscious Metasha. Unexpectedly, the Duke's daughter insisted on staying with Marjorie, because she knew some basic healing spells. The deputy commander of the Summer Solstice Knights, Bromfield, also agreed to her request. Just hold on for a minute. Silver Dragon Mithril lay quietly on top of the ruins. Her wings drooped and her slender neck curled up. She narrowed her eyes and watched the battle in the air. Only when a draconic beast breached the defense line and got too close would she raise her head and spit out a mouthful of silver holy flames to burn it to ashes. The gargoyles in the sky were not lacking in intelligence. These Buga's creations gradually discovered this detail and began to consciously lead the dragons to the top of the ruins. Although Mithril's holy flames would inevitably cause collateral damage, the Grade 4 gargoyles were far weaker than the Grade 7 Ridgeback dragons. Even if they led the dragons to crash into the Silver Dragon Lady and perish together, it was still better than fighting them head-on. The ratio of exchange was 10-1. Mithril was slightly annoyed by the gargoyles' actions. She spoke to Brendel telepathically. These toys of yours belong to the Bugas, right? If they dared to do this on any other day, I would have burned them all to ashes. Brendel nodded. It turned out that before the Slate War, Wone's best air force had become toys. Only a dragon would dare to say such a thing. Brando pretended not to hear it to avoid getting angry. He only replied, "Don't forget that they are protecting you. Also, don't attack anymore. The time distortion will speed up your movements. Be careful not to be seen by that guy in the sky. But your toys are going to be a huge loss. Is that okay?" Brando was naturally heartbroken. The more than 1,000 gargoyles that the Bugas had given him were the real deal, not the monkey versions that were usually sold outside. After this battle, he would probably lose more than half of them. Although the steel marionette and the gargoyles were originally intended to be used in the Holy War, his imaginary enemy was the Lion Men of Toquinen. If he had known that he would have to face the Ridgeback dragons, he would have asked for more. He would have probably asked for 3,000 gargoyles instead of 1,000. The problem was he had no choice but to do so. Brando shook his head, not in the mood to answer. Mithril looked at him and said, "Don't worry, human. If you survive, I will let you go to my treasury and choose a treasure. I promise that its value will not be less than your losses today." Brando's heart skipped a beat. After all, it was the treasure of the dragons. There was a legend in Wone that said the treasure of the dragons was the treasury of the kingdom. In other words, the treasure of a dragon was even comparable to the wealth of a kingdom. These two treasures, together with the ancient ruins buried underground, could be said to be the three ultimate treasures in the Amber Sword. Any one of the three would be enough to make an adventurer rich. The dragons were obsessed with treasures. Every single dragon knew their wealth like the back of their hand. Even if someone were to steal a single gold coin from them, they would immediately discover it. Needless to say, the kingdom's treasury was heavily guarded. Naturally, it would be heavily guarded by the army. Not only that, the dragons were obsessed with treasures. Dragons were obsessed with treasures. Every single dragon knew their own wealth like the back of their hand. Even if someone were to steal a single gold coin from them, they would immediately discover it. As for the ancient ruins, they were even more elusive. In the entire south of Erewhon, Brando had only heard of one that was successfully excavated in Valhalla. Mithril was an adult dragon, and it went without saying how rich her treasures were. There must be a lot of good things in there, and there might even be subdivine artifacts. Even if he couldn't choose freely, as long as he could get a high-grade artifact, it would be enough for him to benefit for a period of time. But he immediately calmed down. "Let's talk about it after I survive." A hint of surprise flashed in Mithril's quicksilver eyes. The elapsed needle was slowly turning, and it was only a third of the way through. The maximum acceleration rate of this subdivine artifact was 10 times, but that was for Brando. The laws of nature were different at different levels. If Brando wanted to accelerate an existence like Mithril for 5 minutes, it would take him at least 1 minute. On the battlefield where every second mattered, it would be an extremely long time. More than once, he wished he had the traceback plate, because the traceback plate could rewind to 10 minutes ago, and it would take effect instantly. It didn't cost any EXP. 10 minutes ago, Mithril was still alive and could fight the Black Dragon Malthus head-on. It would be easy to lure the black dragon away. But that was just a thought. 40 seconds left. Cooper listened to the screams and roars in the sky outside with some trepidation. The flashes of the explosions lit up the night sky from time to time. The ground trembled slightly in the roar, and dust rustled from the ceiling. He stared straight at the dancing pebbles on the floor, thinking that this night might be the end of the world. Everyone could face a catastrophe at any time. But after all, he was on horseback. A noble's performance was much better than those pretty boys who were trembling in fear. Not to mention that the little Prince of Aween was sitting not far away from him. Although his face was pale, at least he was calm enough. This made it even more difficult for him to swallow his pride and act too unbearably, not to mention that there were two beautiful ladies beside the little prince. He knew Countess Yenbao and nun Princess Magadol. Dilfrey had just recovered from the backlash of the spell, and her face was very pale. She leaned weakly on Princess Magadol, and not far away, Earl Elkhorn sat opposite her with a gloomy face. No one knew what he was thinking. As the former's retainer, Cooper didn't dare to be unlucky. He could only hope that the Earl from Tonajol could continue to create miracles. A miracle, just like the one that taught the Cruise's border legion a lesson, drove the damn black dragon away. A panicked guy ran out from the next room. Cooper knew this person. He was a small noble near the border of the four-leaf clover plains. He was Earl Jean's subordinate. He was white and fat, and there were no calluses on his hands. At first glance, he looked like a new noble who climbed up the ranks by relying on connections. And the fact was, this person was able to gain Jean's favor because he had an outstanding sister. The man rolled and crawled in front of Cooper and Earl Elkhorn, and shouted as if he had seen a ghost. "Not good, someone ran away, someone died." "What do you mean?" Cooper was stunned. It was normal for someone to die at this time. In the situation outside, it would be strange if there were no deaths. However, it was obviously not that simple. The fat man couldn't even explain clearly with gestures, so he had to take the others to the scene. Finally, Cooper understood what had happened. Someone among the nobles ran away and killed another Cruise noble before he left. The unlucky guy had a long wound on his chest, as if he was killed in the pulling. His head was tilted to one side, and his face was sallow. It was obvious that he had been dead for a long time. It was likely that he had died before the battle. It was not surprising that someone ran away, but it was a little strange that someone killed someone before running away. It was puzzling. Cooper instinctively felt that something was wrong. He was about to order someone to investigate, but it was at this time that the Cruise nobles outside screamed, "That guy is there! Murderer!" Cooper's heart tightened, and he hurried out of the house. In an instant, he saw a man not far away climbing to the roof of a nearby building. The man was wearing a viscount's black gown, and his collar and cuffs were stained with blood. He held a sharp knife and quickly climbed to the roof on his hands and feet, and then opened his arms in the air. Cooper looked at the guy with some confusion because he remembered this person. In fact, there were a lot of Cruise nobles who accompanied Brando. In addition to a few people such as Sir Moore, there were also many knights and knights from other places. There were many knights and gentry from the countryside. These people responded to the Lord's call, and brought their own retainers and attendants to participate in the operation to intercept Count Trentheim. Because there were so many people involved in almost all of Anzaruta, not everyone among the nobles knew each other. Cooper remembered that this man was one of the people he rescued from the tomb. At that time, this guy was following them silently. Although they did not know each other, Cooper saw that he was wearing a viscount's costume and thought that he was a local noble. He did not expect that the latter would do such a thing. He watched as the man climbed up the rooftop with his arms wide open. He still didn't know what the man wanted to do. At this time, the rooftop was obviously the most dangerous place in the entire battlefield. Could it be that the man killed someone and ran out just to be a target? This was obviously not logical. "Lord Malthus," the man on the roof shouted at this time. "I'm the person who will take care of this, get me out of here." The sudden shout seemed insignificant in the midst of the chaotic battlefield, but Malthus still noticed it. The senses of the dragons were so sharp. In fact, in the whole of Greystone Town, even deep underground and in the nearby hills, Malthus could not sense anything except for the area around Mithril, which he could not sense. Even the softest whispers could not escape the giant dragon's ears. The only difference was whether the dragon was willing to pay attention to it. When Malthus heard the word person, he lowered his head in midair and looked down at the insect-like existence on the roof on the ground. The latter kept waving at him. Malthus thought for a while before he remembered the purpose of this abominable creature's existence. He snorted softly. When he saw the intimidating shadow in midair looking down in his direction, Willard Wallen was overjoyed. Willard Wallen was his name on the surface, but his real name was Ferguson, and he also had a code name, Knight. He was the human who had always been with Tonto. No, it was not the case. Contrary to what the Grand Chancellor's daughter and the others had guessed, he was neither the Count of Trentheim nor Tempu's aide. He rarely appeared in the outside world, and very few people knew of his true identity. In fact, when that foolish subterrane dweller buried his future, Ferguson immediately hid in the tomb and locked himself up. Those foolish local nobles didn't recognize him and only treated him as a companion. No one even checked his identity. What made him even more ecstatic was that the enemy's commander was actually from Erewhon. This gave him a bold plan. Knowing that he would not be exposed, he did not choose to run away along the way. Instead, he sneakily followed them. Sure enough, it was just as he had expected. From the beginning to the end, no one doubted his identity. The only exception was when he encountered a little bit of trouble when he was about to escape. This was his best opportunity, and Ferguson thought that he had grasped it. Tonto, that idiot, did not realize what he had gotten, but he recognized it. That stupid caveman treated such a treasure like scrap metal. He deserved to be humiliated. He did not intend to mention it. He wanted to wake up that stupid guy from the underground. He wanted to pass that thing to someone else, but he could not care so much now. Saving his life was more important. He raised his hands to Malthus in midair and spoke again. 20 seconds left. The draconic beasts did not break through the gargoyle's defensive line at the last moment. The long 60 seconds seemed to have come to an end. Just as Brando was about to breathe a sigh of relief, he subconsciously turned his head and caught a glimpse of this scene. When he saw Ferguson standing on a distant roof and shouting the name of that damn lizard, he knew that something was wrong. Rogers and the others had long suspected that there was a traitor in the Empire, but they did not expect that this traitor was lurking in Greystone Town and chose to appear at this time. It could be said that he understood what was going on in an instant. He couldn't help but curse Cooper in his heart. "Dear madam, I'm afraid we have to end the spell early. I'm afraid Malthus will intervene soon." Brando immediately asked through the telepathic link, "Can you recover in advance?" "I'm afraid not." Of course Mithril knew what was going on, but she could not do anything now. Otherwise, it would only lead to Malthus' revenge. She replied in a low voice, "With my current injuries, I'm afraid it will be difficult to lure Malthus away." Brando remained silent. Now, he could only hope that Maynard would be able to get rid of the lizard before it attracted Malthus' attention. However, Ferguson understood this as well. He knew how prideful the dragons were. If he did not pique their interest immediately, he would not even know how he died. He simply shouted, "Lord Malthus, the war slate." Before he could finish his sentence, a sharp arrow flew towards him from the darkness. Before the arrow could reach him, it hit a layer of shining golden net and turned into ashes in an instant. Not far away, a bow-wielding officer of the White Lion Guard screamed in agony. His body burst into flames and he rolled down from the roof. "What did you say?" Malthus' voice rumbled in the air. "It's over." At that moment, although Brando's vision was blocked by Mithril's wings and he could not see clearly what had happened, when the damned lizard opened its mouth, it meant that they had missed their last chance. Cooper, who was not far away, was now pale and on the verge of collapse. He seemed to have finally realized what had happened. Maynard's face was gloomy. The female knight wanted to take out her longbow several times, but in the end, she resisted the urge to do so. There were only 10 seconds left, but it seemed to be out of reach. The war slate. Ferguson knew that he was under Malthus' protection and immediately heaved a sigh of relief. He even looked at Sir Cooper, who looked as if he had seen a ghost, and replied, "Do you still remember the divine artifact reaction in the nearby area a few days ago?" "Dear Lord Malthus, I..." But he did not finish his sentence because at this moment, everyone heard a soft buzzing sound. In the void, a straight silver line shot out of nowhere, piercing through the smoke and dust on the battlefield. One end of it seemed to extend from another street in the darkness, while the other end landed on Ferguson's chest, leaving a small spot of light there. The latter was slightly stunned and looked at this scene in confusion. What was this? This was probably the same question in everyone's mind at that moment. But the answer was immediately found. In an instant, a silver pillar of light pierced through the night sky. Chapter 940. After the beam of light, Ferguson was nowhere to be seen. There was only a 10-meter wide hole in the roof of the building where he had been standing. The dust on the battlefield seemed to have been dispersed by the beam of light, revealing the elf sitting on the other side of the street. She held a silver spear in her hands, and Jude was lying on top of her head. The two of them waved their hands and shouted in panic. "No, it's not the elf's fault. He shot it himself." "Demon Slayer spear," Cooper shouted when he saw the spear in the elf's hand. "You're from the House of Freud. How dare you?" Malthus growled in a low voice. Although he did not care about the life and death of an ant, the fact that someone dared to make a move right under his nose was a blatant insult to the dignity of a dragon. In an instant, countless golden vortexes appeared in the dark night sky. Countless meteors with flaming tails shot out from the vortexes, forming a rain of fire that covered almost half of Greystone Town. They appeared above the little elf and Shiani's heads. Ah! The elf and Jude were so scared that their limbs turned to jelly. They hugged each other and cried, "Mother, I don't want to die." The girl and the dragon had nowhere to run. They thought that they were doomed this time, but they hugged each other tightly for a while. Although their ears were filled with the sound of explosions and the earth was shaking, the expected death did not come. Curious, they opened their eyes and saw a magnificent scene. The rain of fire swept across half of the night sky, but there was a semi-transparent shield-shaped force field in the air. The meteors collided with the force field and exploded into flashes of light. Sparks fell from the sky like fireworks in the rite of resurrection. Only a few of the fireballs that penetrated the force field landed on the ground and caused sparse explosions. Seeing this, Malthus screamed in shock and anger. "Mithril, you actually recovered? How is this possible?" Mithril flapped her huge wings and slowly stood up from the ruins. She stretched her body elegantly and stared at Malthus in the air. "Malthus, I haven't seen you for many years, and you've been reduced to bullying little girls. You've really improved a lot, haven't you? How did you do it?" Malthus stared at Mithril. He could tell that Mithril was not forcing herself. Although she had not fully recovered, she had at least regained some of her strength. She scanned the square with her cold eyes and finally noticed Brando, who was standing beside Brando. She roared, "Damn human! You must be the one behind this." The moment Brando turned off the elapsed time indicator, he felt as if he had aged 10 years. Of course, this wasn't true aging, but the illusion of having his life force sucked away. His face was terrifyingly pale, and he could barely stand. He immediately checked his status. The Frost Soil Guard, which had consumed the most EXP, had dropped by 2 levels. Its strength had dropped from the peak of elemental activation to the upper levels. At this time, Malthus's aura descended from the sky onto him. Every hair on Brando's body stood on end. He looked up and saw a pair of obsidian-like eyes. What a pair of eyes! They were emotionless, cold, and dull, but at the same time murderous. The aura of a dragon was so terrifying that it could almost make an ordinary person collapse. However, the one it encountered was Brando. Brando was already angry, and he subconsciously activated frenzy. His aura suddenly rose and tore Malthus's aura into pieces. He glanced at the flying lizard and chose to ignore its words. "Eh?" Malthus was slightly startled, as if he had noticed something. Mithril also felt the change in Brando's body. She calmly cut off Malthus's aura and said to him with a dissatisfied look, "What, you only dare to be rude to my human friends? Your opponent is here, Malthus." Malthus retracted his gaze and looked at Mithril, snorting disdainfully. "You've just recovered and you've already forgotten the pain. You weren't so forgetful before, Mithril. This is for you, little one. Don't forget our promise. If you survive, I'll let you pick one of my treasures." She tapped Brendel's forehead with her claw and said, "This is for you. Don't forget our promise. If you survive, I'll let you pick one of my treasures." She looked up and sneered at Malthus. "If it weren't for your despicable and shameless ways of sneaking up on me with two of you, it would be hard to say who would win." Malthus. "Humph, since when did a battle between dragons pay attention to the rules of those mortals?" "You're right. That's why there's no rule that says I have to stay tonight and perish together with you." Mithril finished speaking and raised her wings. Her silver wings were like a pair of huge sails. She gently flapped her wings, and the airflow caused everyone on the ground, as well as the dragons and gargoyles in the sky, to be blown away. However, Mithril was obviously deliberately controlling the airflow. The dragons that were fighting with the gargoyles fell to the ground one by one, or crashed into the nearby buildings. The gargoyles, on the other hand, were only slightly unstable and spinning in midair. The silver dragon Mithril soared into the sky and dodged Malthus' claws in midair. She then turned around and flew towards the hills in the south. "Malthus, I'll see you at the arbitration tribunal. Don't even think about running away." Malthus, of course, knew what Mithril meant. After all, they had violated their oath to come to the surface world. When they met Mithril, they were worried that she would attract the attention of other dragons, especially the ancient dragons from the Council of Elders. Therefore, they decided to sneak up on her from the clouds to kill her. However, they did not expect Mithril to be so powerful. Although she was seriously injured, she still managed to escape to this place. If she did not accidentally expose her aura, they would not even have discovered her. In Wound, silver dragons were known for their speed. If Mithril really wanted to escape, Malthus was worried that he would not be able to catch up with her. Therefore, when Mithril escaped, he did not want to stay in Greystone Town any longer. He flapped his wings and chased after Mithril. Everyone on the ground looked up at the scene of the two dragons piercing through the clouds and leaving. They could not help but feel inexplicably shocked, especially the Kurlutz nobles, who could hardly believe that the terrible dragon had let them go. As soon as the terrible pressure disappeared from the sky, everyone seemed to have lost their souls. Their legs went soft and they collapsed to the ground. The joy of surviving the disaster drained the last trace of strength from their bodies. Even the knights of the Solstice Knights and the young men of the White Lion Guards knelt on the roof one by one, not to mention the others. Cooper sat on the ground and could not help but pinch his thigh hard, and then he gasped in pain. Brando heaved a sigh of relief. He was glad that the last thing Mithril gave him was the purest form of magic. It was the power of dragons. In short, it was EXP. The EXP was just a drop in the ocean for Mithril, but for him it not only made up for the EXP he lost, but it also doubled the EXP he lost. It made Brando feel that good people are rewarded. Moreover, the Silver Dragon lady still owed him a collection. It was a win-win deal. He originally thought that he was at a disadvantage, but now he wished that he could do it a few more times. Unfortunately, this kind of thing was like the high-level encounter quests in the Amber Sword. It was something that could only be chanced upon. He did not have time to count the EXP he gained. He just casually reset the level he lost. When he looked up, he saw the Duke's daughter running towards him. "Captain, what happened just now? Did we win?" Eugenie asked with a frown. "What should we do next? Should we stop and rest, or should we leave this place first?" In the eyes of others, this battle was more or less inexplicable. The process of the battle was so tragic that they paid a heavy price in just a few minutes. Of course, the gargoyles suffered the most losses, but the Solstice Knight Regiment and the White Lion Guards also suffered heavy losses. Secondly, the battle was very short. It started inexplicably and ended inexplicably. Except for Brando and Maynard, who knew the inside story, everyone was passively obeying orders. Then, the two dragons strangely left one after the other. Now there were still some ridge drakes left on the battlefield, but everyone could see that they were no longer a threat. Brando shook his head, indicating that it was an internal matter of the dragons. He could not explain it. "We can't stay and rest. We have to leave this place immediately, and go to the lower reaches of the surging Milky Way on the map." The lower reaches of the surging Milky Way? It's still quite a distance from here. Eugenie glanced at the crew's nobles. This battle had caused many casualties, and the others were more or less frightened. She doubted that these people could hold on until then. Even she was, to be honest, exhausted at this time. "It's okay. Just tell them the truth. There's another dragon. Who knows when it will turn back?" If anyone wants to stay here and wait for death, do as you wish. Brando replied. Eugenie's expression changed. She had seen the two black shadows passing through the clouds with her own eyes. This nightmarish scene was not something she wanted to experience a second time. In fact, Brando was more worried. He had a feeling that Mithril's last sentence was just to confuse his judgment. The silver dragons were known for their speed on the continent of Vaughn. If she wanted to run, she could do so at any time. There was no need for her to hide in this place and wait to be discovered. He did not know how much of an effect the 5-minute acceleration of the clock would have on a dragon, but he vaguely felt that the silver dragon lady was buying time for them. Although he did not understand why she was doing this, the only choice he had now was to leave this place as soon as possible. And after tonight's battle, the plan to head to Lone Harbor had to be reorganized. He didn't expect Jorgendy Ridge to turn out in full force. Even the 3 black dragon overlords came to join in the fun. Although he didn't know what entanglements they had with the dragons, no matter how arrogant he wasn't confident that he could rely on a harbor to fight against a few adult dragons. He had already contacted the Shire. The nobles' private soldiers who attacked the West Gate were lucky. That place could be said to be the least affected place in the whole of Greystone Town. Although the private soldiers were frightened when the dragons appeared, and many of them fled almost immediately, those who fled to the West Gate found that the troglodytes who were originally stationed there had also fled in fear. They hid there all night until Malthus and Mithril left. Only then did they realize that they had actually occupied the West Gate and fortress of Greystone Town. It could be said that the Shire and Rogers did not expend a single soldier. They just took a stroll in the town and won. Brando could not help but sigh at this kind of luck. His order was quickly passed down. Unexpectedly, the resistance was surprisingly small. The nobles were already scared out of their wits. Even if Brando asked them to stay, they would not dare to stay in Greystone Town. They wanted to leave as soon as possible and hide as far away as possible. It would be best if they never returned to this place for the rest of their lives, lest they have nightmares. Brando had his own considerations for setting the assembly point at the downstream of the surging Silver River. He knew that there was an underground passage in Greystone Town that led in that direction. Just as Aween's envoys were about to leave Greystone Town, Nun Princess Magadal, accompanied by an officer of the White Lion Guards, found him. Both of them had heard of the 3 black dragons in the Jorgendy Ridge, but they had never heard of the agreement between them and the dragons. They only knew that the 3 black dragons were expelled from the Dragon's Valley at the same time. No one knew when they were expelled, because the surface world's understanding of the Jorgendy Ridge was limited, not to mention the mysterious dragons. The information was even scarcer. They could only speculate that it was around 100 years ago, because the name of the 3 black dragons had not been heard during the Underground War before and after the Glorious Year, and the Minotaur Lord Gerald had become famous during that era. But when he saw Magadal, he couldn't help but be stunned. He met the Nun Princess in Ampere Seal and owed her a favor during the battle in Ampere Seal. Later on, he found the heart of the giant dragon for her, and saved her from the hands of the Grim Reaper. The two of them were very close, but ever since the Nun Princess woke up, other than thanking him once, the two of them didn't have much interaction. It was for this reason that he didn't tell the Nun Princess about the secret of her body. On one hand, he didn't know how to tell her. Could he just say, "I'm sorry, but miss, you're actually a puppet?" He did not know how scared Magadal would be if she heard it. On the other hand, Brando faintly felt that the Nun Princess seemed to be aware of the abnormality in her body, which was why she deliberately distanced herself from others. Regarding this point, Brando did not mention it. Since he did not know how to say it, he might as well let the Nun Princess figure it out herself. After all, there was no way to hide the truth. Just like how he had a lightning core in his body, Magadal would eventually realize the power of the heart of the dragon in his body. Perhaps after a long period of subtle influence, the Nun Princess would finally accept this fact. However, he did not expect Magadal to find him at this time. Brando could not help but subconsciously think that when the 2 dragons appeared, the heart of the dragon in the princess body had some kind of reaction. "Mr. Brando." The Nun Princess seemed to be a little uneasy, but once she spoke, she dispelled Brando's doubts. "Miss Dilfrey asked me to look for you. You should come and take a look at this." "Your Highness, what did you find?" Brando was slightly startled. Not me, Mr. Brando. Marjorie and the others found a person. A person. Of course, Brando did not think that Marjorie and the others would come looking for him just because they found a cat or a dog. Princess Magadol's words implied that this person might be related to him. However, he was a little puzzled. In the Cruz Empire, there were only a few people who were related to him. Whether it was Faina or Veronica, there was nothing that he could not say. Looking at the princess' expression, it seemed that his relationship with this person was not very good. But after thinking carefully, he felt that he did not have any personal rivals in Cruz. With such doubts, Brando simply brought Maynard and the princess all the way to where Marjorie and the others were. There were already many young White Lion guards gathered there, and when he arrived, everyone immediately made a path for him. Brando first saw the little elf standing there. Of course, he still remembered this little troublemaker. She and the demon slayer spear in her hand could be said to have saved everyone's lives. Originally, he had no intention of leaving the little girl behind, but Cooper insisted on leaving her behind because of the demon slayer spear in her hand. Brando did not want to interfere with the private affairs of the nobles in Cruz, so he decided to let the knight handle it himself. But at this time, the little elf's lips were curled up high. She glared at Brando, obviously very dissatisfied. Brendel sighed when he saw this scene. He felt that he needed to talk to Cooper. Bullying a little girl didn't seem to be a good reputation if word got out. And it was at this time that he finally saw the person in the crowd. Author's note: I had too much fun last night. I played Dota 2 the whole night. I woke up late today and was not in the mood. I'm really sorry that I only finished my coding now. I have to postpone my outburst. Woo, I didn't do it on purpose, don't hit me. Chapter 941. Brando parted the crowd and saw the person. To be exact, he could vaguely see that it was a woman. She was wearing tattered and burnt clothes that barely covered the important parts of her body. Her entire body was covered in burns, and some parts of her body had already festered. Her right hand was almost charred, and her beautiful face was covered in horrifying blisters. Half of her hair was burnt away, and it was difficult to distinguish her original appearance. His first thought when he saw the woman was that she was still alive. It was a miracle. Her chest was moving up and down weakly, which was the only sign that she was still alive. Furthermore, Brando could feel the residual aura of holy magic on her body. Magadol must have used holy magic to stabilize her injuries. Other than that, he could not think of any other reason why she was still alive. But even so, it would be difficult for her to live for more than a few days. Organ failure would quickly take her life. She was not a member of the diplomatic party. There were no women among the nobles of Cruz, so she should be an innocent civilian who was affected by Malthus's attack. What a pitiful woman. Brando could tell that she must have been a rare beauty before she was injured. But the flames would not show mercy to the fairer sex. She could still struggle in pain for a while, but soon she would return to the dark abyss and the embrace of Goddess Elaine. Brando mourned for her in his heart for a moment, and then turned to look at Magadol and the pale Dilfari. He did not recognize them and did not understand why they called him here. Could it be that these ladies suddenly felt sympathy and wanted to hold a funeral for this woman? That was absolutely impossible. No matter how sympathetic he was, he would not put more than 1,000 people in danger for a woman who was about to die. She is Delphian. Dilfari replied softly. Brendel was slightly startled. He had some impression of this name, but it was difficult for him to distinguish the owner of this name from the countless names in his mind. She is the daughter of the Prime Minister. Magadol added when she saw Brando's confused expression. Brando finally understood. So it was her. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. Half a year ago, this woman came to Ferber to cause trouble for him. At that time, because she almost hurt Freya, he got angry and locked her up in the water dungeon below Ferber Castle. However, Freya was kind enough to secretly release her, and let Madame Veronica send her back to the Empire. After that, everything calmed down and he forgot about this matter. He could not punish Freya for such a small matter. He did not expect to meet this lady in such a way after half a year. Although he thought that this Prime Minister's daughter was a little crazy, he was not so narrow-minded as to hold a grudge against a woman. Besides, Freya was only scared but not hurt. Seeing Delphian in such a state, he could not bear to see her like this. He could not help but shake his head, thinking that if he still had holy water #1, he could save her life for the sake of the Prime Minister. But now there was nothing he could do. Realizing that the identity of the woman in front of him was somewhat special, Brando quickly adjusted his mentality. He always had to be careful of the Prime Minister's anger. He was very familiar with the famous Prime Minister Old Nydivan, but he did not know what kind of temperament little Nydivan had. It was really worrying that he could give birth to such a narrow-minded and bigoted daughter. He looked at the others present and asked, "How did she come here, Sir Cooper? What does Earl Alcorn think should be done?" Delphian was the daughter of the Prime Minister of the Empire, so the one who had the most power to decide her fate was naturally the people of Cruz. At present, the person with the highest status was undoubtedly Earl Alcorn. Brando did not want to get into trouble with the Prime Minister, but the Earl was not afraid. Besides, the Earl had no reason to refuse. After all, the nobles of Cruz still cared about their reputation. But Brando did not expect Cooper to look at him with a very strange gaze and replied, "We haven't told Earl Alcorn yet. After all, in this situation, it is more appropriate for Earl Alcorn to make the decision." Brando was stunned. Cooper was Earl Alcorn's retainer. Since when did he dare to make decisions for his lord? But he looked around and found that the people present did not seem to be surprised by this, and did not object to this statement. What does this mean? This woman had offended him before, but he did not seem to be narrow-minded to the point that he would not let a woman go. Even the nobles of Cruz had to show their dignity in the face of women's fashion. Could it be that in the eyes of the world, he, Brando, was worse than these nobles? Even Dilfrey and Princess Magadol were here. In a sense, these two ladies could be considered as one of Tanajal's people. Their attitude made Brando feel very hurt. Cooper seemed to have seen through Brando's confusion, but he did not dare to say anything. He could only give Princess Magadol a look. The latter sighed slightly and explained, "Mr. Brando, Delphian did not come here alone. Your White Lion guards found her entourage and bodyguards. After their questioning, they were certain that they were actually here for you." Then the nun princess slowly explained the whole story. Brendel felt like he was listening to a fairy tale. He would never have thought that the demon-slaying spear in the elf's hand was meant to be used against him, but it ended up saving everyone instead. The Prime Minister's daughter really made his hair stand on end. He did not know if she was too stubborn, or if she had perseverance and willpower. But this crazy woman deserved it. She came all the way here to deal with him, but she did not expect to attract the black dragon Malthus and end up like this in a sea of fire. Brendel looked at Delphine's almost deformed body, but he did not feel the slightest bit of schadenfreude. If there had been a mistake tonight, he would have been the one who ended up like this, and there would definitely be more people who would be implicated. After all, this was not just a game. He shook his head and sighed. Forget it. After all, these things did not happen. This young lady, take her with you. If she can't hold on, at least give her a dignified funeral. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they heard his words, especially Cooper. Brendel's actions could be considered as giving face to the Prime Minister. Anyone who heard such a thing could only praise the Count from Aween for his magnanimity. That Prime Minister Nydivan had no right to vent his anger on Brendel. Nobles always paid attention to their dignity. Cooper was even secretly grateful to Brando. He knew that the Count of Tanajal was not necessarily afraid of revenge from the Empire, but they could not afford to bear it. Brando was known for his toughness. He even dared to offend Her Majesty the Queen of the Empire. How could he be afraid of a mere Prime Minister? So in private, Cooper felt that the Count said this to take care of them. The Count's reputation in Erewhon was excellent. He neither flattered nor bullied the weak. This saying seemed to have been confirmed. Of course, Brando did not know that he was just saying it casually out of sympathy. The lower nobles in Cruz had so many opinions about him. It was as if he had become synonymous with noble character, and had won an excellent reputation among the lower nobles. His thoughts were actually very simple. Since Miss Delphian was at death's door, there was no need for him to add insult to injury. He might as well be magnanimous and not let the Prime Minister, whose temper was unknown, find any excuse to cause trouble for him. In fact, he was completely afraid of the Prime Minister's daughter. Even when facing the Supreme of the Empire, at least the other party's actions were followed by logic. However, this young lady was purely a lunatic. The thoughts of a lunatic could not be guessed by normal logic. It was terrible to keep such a person as his enemy. Fortunately, the noble Mr. Malthus helped him solve this problem cleanly. Brendel was so grateful to a certain black dragon that he almost shed tears of gratitude. Because Greystone Town had been reduced to ruins due to the battle between the two dragons, the garrisons in the city, no matter which side they belonged to, in the eyes of the dragons, the subterranean dwellers of Jorgendy Ridge were no different from humans. Just like how a normal person would not differentiate between good and bad ants when stepping on ants, they would definitely trample all of them to death with one stomp. They had already fled long ago, so Aween's envoy group did not encounter any trouble when they left. There were still draconic beasts in the city, but most of them had left with Malthus. The few that had fallen behind or had fallen unconscious in the ruins did not dare to find trouble with the hundreds of gargoyles in the sky. They all stayed far away and hid in the nearby hills. Erwin's people and Cruz's people walked through the streets full of broken walls. As far as the eye could see, the whole town was a scene of devastation. The streets were full of rubble, and there were corpses of troglodytes, harpies, and even humans everywhere. The whole town was dead silent from above, like a ghost town. Brando looked at the completely destroyed eastern part of Greystone Town, and could not help but sigh at the destruction caused by the battle between the Supreme Realm. It was foreseeable that in the next 10 years, it would be difficult for this place to recover its prosperity, and it was more likely that the war would leave a shadow in everyone's heart. The refugees caused by the war might not even return to this place for a long time. This place would be abandoned for a long time, until decades later, the remains and withered grass left behind would tell the passers-by what had happened here. Stories about the shadows of the dragons sweeping across the land. And this kind of spreading flames of war was only the beginning of an era of war and chaos. Brendel thought of the metal disc in Maynard's hands, and he had a vague feeling that a certain era might have already begun in advance. This holy war might evolve into an even more widespread upheaval, and thus engulf the entire world in a never-ending vortex. In another part of history, he had witnessed this with his own eyes. The only difference was that in this world there was Erwin. He turned around and waved at the Shire in the distance. Erwin's diplomatic group was preparing to leave Greystone Town, but Sir Cooper had other work to do. Perhaps Brando finally convinced him, or perhaps he realized that bullying a little girl was not something to be proud of, so he decided to let the elf go. But now that they knew the origin of the Demon Slayer spear, they could not let this unknown elf girl take it away, or else Count Floyd would blame it on them. They had already offended the House of Nidwin, but no one was willing to add the Floyds to the list. Under Brando's suggestion, Cooper decided to personally persuade her to hand over the Demon Slayer spear, and then she could go wherever she wanted, and no one would be able to stop her. But the persuasion work was not easy. "Little girl, we're not going to lock you up, but this spear belongs to us, the people of Cruz. As long as you leave it behind, you're free to go wherever you want. It was the elf who saved you, but you want to bite the hand that feeds you. You're bad. I admit that, and we can compensate you, but the spear is neither yours nor ours, so you have to leave it behind. Do you understand?" "Liar, you're bullying the elf." The elf's eyes glistened with tears. Cooper suddenly felt a headache coming on. He did not want to be known as a bully, but his mouth was already dry, and the little girl in front of him was stubborn. There were a few times when he almost fumed with anger, but he was too embarrassed to force himself on a little girl. Besides, even if he wanted to, Brando might not allow it. In front of him, the elf held the Demon Slayer spear tightly and stared at him vigilantly. She did not want to leave it behind, nor did she want to give her treasure to this person. Although the other party was exaggerating, who knew if it was true or not? In her logic, if the elf picked up something, it would naturally be the elf spoils of war. In the end, Cooper could only say, "Forget it. Anyway, before you leave the spear behind, you can only stay here. When you've thought it through, you can come back and tell us." After saying that, he left this damn place with a terrible headache. After Cooper left for a while, the elf said to the pseudo-dragon beside her in fear, Shani, what should we do? They're going to rob me." Shani rolled her eyes, thinking that it was obviously the elf who stole other people's things. However, when she thought that the Demon Slayer spear belonged to the bad guys who wanted to catch her, She did not have the slightest hesitation in her heart. She replied matter-of-factly, "That's easy. They won't let us leave, so we'll just sneak away." Sneak away? But the elf's cloak has already been lost. It's okay. Shani flapped her wings and said confidently, "Watch me." The elf's expression changed. "Shani, are you going to use your scary magic again? I think we shouldn't leave. Actually, it's good to stay here. That human sister is very nice to me. She even gave me candy to eat. I even exchanged names with her. She said her name is Yenit." "You told her your real name?" Shani was startled. "Of course not. Then why did you exchange names?" "I said my name is Little Elf." "Go away, you damn naughty child." Shani replied in a bad mood. "Can't you show some respect? Exchanging names is a sacred thing between friends." "Okay, I'll go tell Yenit what you're called now. We won't leave." The elf replied carefully. "Don't try to change the topic. My magic is scary." Shani was so angry that she slapped the elf's forehead with her wings. "If it wasn't for my magic last time, we would have fallen to our deaths when that bad woman and the black dragon were fighting. But if it wasn't for your magic, we wouldn't have been knocked down from the clouds." The elf retorted with disdain. That was just the wrong spell." Shani retorted. "What about this time?" "Of course it won't happen this time. You don't believe me. I won't be friends with you anymore, damn elf." Okay, really." The little elf was startled and hurriedly comforted her companion. "Of course it's true." Shani patted her chest and promised, "Just watch me." Brando was counting the casualties. The death rate of the White Lion guards in this battle made him frown. In just a few minutes, the casualty rate had exceeded half of them. Fortunately, most of them were either dead or crippled under normal circumstances. With the help of the holy water, they could be treated as acceptable light injuries. Otherwise, he would have been worried sick. The White Lion guards were his elites, the backbone of the future Erwin's basic infantry. Losing even one of them would make his heart ache. If it wasn't for the fact that he had no other choice, he wouldn't even dream of using them against a dragon. He listened to the numbers reported by Maynard and Yuta as he watched the diplomatic party slowly pass through the west gate of Greystone Town. At this moment, he saw Cooper coming from the back of the party with a sour face. Seeing his expression, he knew that Cooper's persuasion wasn't going well. "Sir Cooper, how is it?" "Sigh, don't mention it." Cooper shook his head helplessly. "I've made a fool of myself in front of the Count. It's not a big deal. Elves are naturally distrustful of humans, especially the wild elves. Although they often appear in human society, they are actually even colder than the wind elves." Brando replied. When he said this, he couldn't help but think of the wild elf sisters in the diplomatic party. Falerne could be said to be the typical elf he had seen before. Her sister Tia was a little different. This probably had a lot to do with the fact that Tia grew up in the human world. "If you show enough sincerity, I think she won't be unreasonable. After all, she's just a child." "The Count is really knowledgeable," Cooper complimented. "But I don't have that much patience. She's just a child. She'll understand if I scare her a little." "But does the Count have any objections to this?" Brando looked at Cooper, a little surprised that this guy would actually take a child seriously. He shrugged, thinking that as long as Cooper didn't go too far, he would be fine. "Don't cause too much trouble, sir. I have elves among my subordinates too. I'm sure you know how I feel about them." "Don't worry, I'm just scaring her," Cooper replied. "Besides, she's just a child. What can she do?" Before he could finish his sentence, there was a loud boom. Everyone saw a pillar of fire rising into the sky from the back of the party. Chapter 942. The underground water tinkled, and a long tunnel extended into the darkness. Some of the collapsed areas even had specks of light shining in, forming 2 or 3 dazzling beams of light in the darkness. Roman tried to push the stacked stones with her hands, but they did not budge. She could only sigh in a different tone and said to Chiara, "It seems that this place won't work either. That's why I said just follow this secret passage and meet up with that guy downstream of the surging Milky Way." Chiara replied. "Didn't your familiar already send a message to that guy? If you ask me, it's much safer underground now than on the surface." She had lost her scholar's hat and glasses. Without the thick glasses blocking her, A delicate face was revealed under her curly hair. She was unexpectedly cute. But it's dark and cold down here. It reminds me of when I was young and hid in those caves in Bucci with Freya. I don't like those places at all, Roman replied. Besides, I've never seen such a big dragon before. I've never seen one either, Chiara replied in annoyance. Both of them were a little dejected for a moment. They had fallen into the ground with the collapsed building during the previous impact. By the time they reacted, they were already in this dark tunnel. According to Chiara's analysis, the building they had been hiding in was probably above the secret passage built by the Knight of the Inner Court. In other words, they should have fallen into that secret passage. This analysis seemed to be the only reasonable possibility, so Roman first turned the white fog into a hamster and found the way to the surface through the cracks of the collapsed stones. She went to inform Brando alone. Then the two of them advanced along the dark tunnel, trying to find the exit that Brando had mentioned that led to the downstream of the surging Milky Way. It was not an easy journey. The secret passage was buried very shallowly under Greystone Town. It was unknown how many years ago it had been built, but it had not been repaired for a long time. Under the impact of the battle between the two dragons on the surface, many places had collapsed. There were a few times when they were almost buried under the soil. Moreover, because many places were blocked by sand and stone, they had to spend a lot of time looking for underground passages that could still be used. Fortunately, the secret passages extended in all directions, and they were not completely blocked in one place. There were a few times when Romaine had a sudden idea and tried to use magic to move the stones, but it almost caused a larger area to collapse. Chiara was so scared that she did not allow her to use any magic again. At this moment they were stopped in a tunnel that had just collapsed. After the last tremor on the surface, the walls and ceiling here broke and collapsed from the ground, stacking together to form a dead end. Let's change directions, Chiara finally said. Chiara, did you hear anything? Roman asked. Chiara was startled. She tilted her head and listened carefully. It was so quiet in the darkness that one could hear a pin drop. Where did that sound come from? It's true. It's under the stone. Chiara looked at Roman and lay down on the stone doubtfully. If it was someone else, she would not have been so patient, but Roman had excellent hearing, so she had to believe it. After listening carefully for a moment, there was indeed a rustling conversation under the stone, as if two people were complaining about each other. Giovanni, you idiot. If you didn't pull my tail, I wouldn't have chanted the spell wrong. But if I didn't remind you, you would have been discovered by that guard. Shut up. That's just an ordinary human soldier. He might not even know the noble false dragon, so how could he see that I was casting a spell? Little elf, you're a complete idiot. Then what should we do now, Giovanni? It's so dark down there and I'm hungry. You only know how to eat. There's no other way. Just wait for your death. Ooh, Giovanni, I don't want to die. Please save this little elf. The Roman widened her eyes and listened curiously to the intermittent conversation. She could not figure out why there were people inside the stone. She could not help but ask loudly, "Are you the elves inside the stone?" The voices inside the stone suddenly quieted down. After a moment, a tentative voice asked, I'm an elf. Who are the people outside the stone?" "I'm a Roman." Chiara frowned and did not answer. "Who is a Roman?" The elf asked again. It was a good question. Even the Roman raised her eyebrows and did not know how to answer. "A Roman is a Roman, but why are you inside the stone? Are you the elves inside the stone?" Aunt said that there are elves inside the stone. They like to hide gems and minerals under the stone as a gift to the diligent. "Are you here to give the Roman treasures?" "No." The little elf replied resolutely. Chiara finally could not listen anymore and asked, "Who are you? Are you the residents of Greystone Town? From what you said, you seem to be elves. Are you a wind elf or a wild elf?" "I'm a wild elf," the elf answered. "Are they both?" "No, Giovanni is a dragon." "Dragon?" The Roman and Chiara shouted in unison. No, it's not the kind of dragon you think. Giovanni is a false dragon." The little fairy hurriedly explained. In her limited impression, dragons were bad, and Shieni was a better kind of dragon. "False dragon. God, it's a false dragon." Chiara raised her eyebrows excitedly and asked loudly, "How is it? Are you in trouble? Do you need us to save you?" You're not bad people, are you? The elf was shocked by her tone. Of course not. Half an hour later, Roman and Chiara spent a lot of effort to save the elf and Giovanni. At first, they wanted to dig away the sand and stones, but just as they moved the stones below, the stones above rolled down and scared the 4 people inside and outside the stone. After the shock, the 2 of them had to find another way. In short, they put their hope in the power of magic, but they tried several spells. In the end, Chiara caught a few rats and Roman used the witch's king's chariot transposition to swap the elf and Giovanni out. The elf, who was buried under the sand and stones, suddenly felt that the space in front of her was empty, and then she appeared in a dark tunnel. When she was in the secret tunnel under Rove's compass, she thought that the human's secret tunnel was long, dark, small, and not fun at all. But now she felt that the dark underground was very spacious. Then with a bang, Giovanni was swapped out and fell heavily on the elf's head. Ah! The elf cried. When she opened her eyes again, she found a few squeaking rats in front of her, looking at her with their sparkling little eyes. She immediately made a fuss and shouted, You're rats! You're the rat! Roman was still sizing up the little elf with interest, but Chiara stepped forward without mercy, grabbed the elf's pointy ears, and lifted her up from the ground. Short-sighted fellow! Ouch, 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 let go of the elf! The elf cried out in pain. You're really bad people. Shut up or I'll kill you. Chiara threatened fiercely. The elf was shocked and shut up. She looked at the little human girl, who was about the same height as her, with red eyes. Where's your pseudo-dragon? Chiara asked. Her eyes suddenly lit up in the dark. She had already seen the pseudo-dragon on the elf's head. She subconsciously reached out to hug it, but she immediately retracted her hand. Although pseudo-dragons often accompany humans, they have very strong self-esteem. This won't do. I heard that they are all creatures with very high intelligence. You have to be polite, Chiara. Chiara cleared her throat and ignored the elf. She asked Giovanni, who was on her head. Dear pseudo-dragon, may I know your name? Can we be friends? No, Giovanni is my friend. The elf pulled Giovanni down and held her tightly in her arms. She stared at Chiara vigilantly, as if she was afraid that she would be snatched away. Didn't you hear what she said, stupid little elf? I have my pride. If you keep hugging me like I'm a can of candy, I'll never talk to you again. Shienni said in an annoyed tone as she struggled to get out of his embrace. Then what should I do? The elf panicked. Put me in your bag, Giovanni said proudly. She waited for the little elf to do as she was told, and then she calmly laid down in the little elf's pouch. She stuck her head out and said to Chiara, Hello, human. My name is Shienni. What are you doing here? We're looking for a way out, Miss Giovanni. Before Chiara could speak, the Roman answered first. Out? Do you mean back to the surface? Giovanni quickly shook her head like a rattle drum. Don't go, the surface is full of bad people. No, we're looking for a way to the lower reaches of the surging Milky Way. This is a very long secret passage. Do you know about it? Romain replied. The exit to the lower reaches of the surging Milky Way, the elf suddenly said. I know. Everyone's eyes fell on her. How do you know? Giovanni asked angrily. How much do you know that I don't? This is the secret passage from before. Giovanni, I stole their entire map. It's in my bag. In your bag? Giovanni rummaged through her bag. There were a lot of candy wrappers and some glass beads, but there was no map. Is there such a thing in here? Did you forget? I used that paper to make a paper dragon when we started a fire a few days ago. The elf replied. Damn it! Giovanni screamed. Is that how you use a map? The elf was proud of herself. It's okay. I can roughly remember what was on the map. Roughly. Chiara frowned as she stared at the elf. When the sun shone down on the forest below the surging Milky Way, a wild pomegranate bush suddenly moved. In the forest, there were always many uninvited guests that liked to hide under the bushes. For example, badgers, bobcats, or even armadillos. But this time a pair of round eyes popped out from under the bush. The Roman looked around and after confirming that there was no danger, she lowered her head and shouted. Seems like we've reached the place. Then quickly climb up, I can't stand anymore. Chiara, who was being stepped on, said sadly. The Roman hurriedly pulled up her skirt and climbed up. She seemed to be good at this and her movements were as nimble as a monkey. After she climbed up effortlessly, she pulled Chiara up, followed by Juani and the elf. Chiara couldn't help but look at the merchant lady in surprise. This wasn't a skill that a noble lady should know. "This is nothing," the merchant lady replied casually. "I've even climbed onto Brando's roof before." The two young ladies were immediately filled with admiration. However, the elf rolled her eyes, and after confirming that there was no danger nearby, she suddenly broke into a run. But before she could run 2 steps, a dark shadow pounced on her. She was so frightened that she screamed and lost her balance and fell to the ground. When she turned her head, she saw that it was Chiara who was gritting her teeth. "What are you doing? Let go of me!" The elf shouted angrily and anxiously. "I told you to run." Even though Chiara was dressed like a scholar, her strength was extraordinary. She easily pressed the elf to the ground and proudly announced, "As my captive without my permission, you are not allowed to leave even half a step." The elf was naturally unconvinced. She shouted for Juani while she wrestled with Chiara. The two young ladies rolled around in the bushes, and soon their hair and clothes were covered with leaves and mud. They completely lost their previous image and looked like refugees and beggars from the north. Juani had already flown out of the elf's bag to avoid being caught in the crossfire. She landed on the Roman's shoulder and looked at the two as if they were idiots. Romaine, on the other hand, was quite interested in watching the two fight. She didn't get tired of it even after watching for a while. If she didn't suddenly realize something, she was afraid that this nonsensical fight would have continued. The Roman's ears suddenly twitched. She raised her head and looked at the other side of the forest. Then she walked over and picked up the two young ladies. She patted the leaves and dirt off their bodies and said, "Stop fooling around, I think there are people coming from that side." Chiara spat out 2 mouthfuls of mud. Her gentle and quiet face had long turned into a dirty little kitten. She glared at the elf and asked, "Who are they? Is it the diplomatic party?" The elf's hair was messy like a bird's nest. Her eyes were red and swollen as if she had just cried. She looked at Chiara fearfully and then said to the Roman, "It must be those bad guys. Let's run, they are bad. There are only a few people. Their footsteps are very light." The Roman shook her head. "It doesn't sound like them. Sounds more like short people like you. Those are subterranean dwellers." Chiara thought of the subterranean dwellers that she had missed. "Great, when they come we will think of a way to catch them." "Why do you want to catch them?" the elf asked in confusion. Chiara was too lazy to explain to her. She only threatened her fiercely. "It's none of your business. Hide well with me. If you are discovered, you are done for." The elf was not afraid of anything, but she could not beat Chiara in a fight. As the saying goes, a wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. She could only keep quiet. The 3 of them quickly found a place to hide. Sure enough, not long after, there was a rustling sound of footsteps in the forest. The 3 ladies hiding in the wild pomegranate bushes saw a few bushes of incense in front of them suddenly split open, and then a few green-faced, fanged faces came out from behind. When the elf saw these faces, she was so frightened that she almost screamed. If Chiara had not hugged her and covered her mouth tightly, she would have screamed. Those were goblins. Roman and Chiara recognized them immediately. The elf's nose was covered by Chiara, and her face turned red. She kept winking at Chiara, but Chiara did not seem to see it. It took her a long time to break free. She could not help but gasp for air. Before she could protest, she could not help but ask curiously, "Aren't we going to catch them?" "It's me, not you," Chiara replied in a bad mood. "Besides, who wants to catch these smelly guys? They are just a bunch of goblins. So boring. Huh." She suddenly let out a soft cry of surprise, because the bushes behind the goblins shook again, and then a dwarf came out. This made her very confused. Everyone knew that the dwarves and the goblins were enemies. However, this dwarf was wearing a wet alchemist's robe. He did not look like a captive of the former. Although he looked miserable, it seemed that his personal freedom was not restricted. The goblins around him looked more like his bodyguards. "Little elf, it's that dwarf," Shieni whispered. "The dwarf who fell asleep after falling down." The elf clearly recognized the dwarf. Chiara almost wanted to kill the 2 of them. She hurriedly pulled them back. Sure enough, a few spears came flying. Roman lowered her head. and a simple wooden spear flew past her hair and nailed into an unknown tree behind her. The goblins had obviously discovered that there were people behind the bushes. They screamed and threw the spears in their hands. They even pulled out their rusty scimitars and rushed over. Behind these goblins, two tall figures quickly appeared from the bushes. Ogres! Chiara bitterly grabbed the elf's pointed ears. It's all your fault. We're going to become the ogre's lunch, you idiot. Ouch, it hurts. Before the goblins rushed into the forest, the two little Lolas were already fighting. Oh! Chapter 943. 2 or 3 goblins at the front of the group screamed and rushed forward. The Roman was shocked and hurriedly cast a slow curse. This second circle spell was very useful against weak monsters like the goblins. The goblins at the front of the group slowed down at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if there was glue on the soles of their feet. Even raising their hands became heavy. They ran with big strides, but it was funny that they were running in slow motion. The former was surprised to find that her spell actually worked. She quickly took out a mirror from her backpack and said, "You can see, but you can't touch." The small group of goblins behind her bumped into each other one after another, as if they had bumped into an invisible wall. The goblins at the front of the group had their faces pressed against a glass. Their pointy noses were tilted to one side, and their whole body was deformed. The other goblins who were slowed down were lucky enough to escape because they were too slow. Unlike the wizard's mirror image spell, which came from the refraction of light, the witch's mirror image spell turned the world in the eyes of the target into a mirror. As the saying went, "You can see but you can't touch." At this moment, the goblins and the 3 ladies were separated by an invisible mirror. There was a boundary between the real and the fake world. If this law could not be broken, then this boundary could not be broken. Witches were a class that players could not choose. The strength of their magic was generally higher than other types of spells in the same circle. It could be said that their magic was second only to dragon magic. However, there was always a trade-off. Black magic was very harmful to the caster's body, so most witches were eccentric. Mirror image spell was a one-way spell, which meant that it only worked on the target. When the elf and Chiara saw that Roman's spell had taken effect, they stopped fighting. The former hurriedly took out a heavy crossbow from her back and shot down a goblin. After shooting an arrow, she immediately threw away the heavy crossbow and replaced it with the demon slayer spear. The latter, on the other hand, took out a magic wand from nowhere and cast a charm spell on the goblins, causing the goblins to fight with their own people. Illusionist! Shani cried out in surprise. Spellcasters were already rare in this era. Most of them were craftsmen and enchanters, while illusionists were as rare as phoenix feathers and Chelan horns. "I only know a little," Chiara replied. "Compared to this, I can't deal with those 2 big guys." The big guy she was talking about was at least 5 or 6 meters tall. When it stood up, it looked like a tower of meat. It had grayish-white skin, long mane or hair, and carried a spiked club as a weapon. It was the most dangerous magical creature in the wilderness, the ogre. The 2 ogres with fierce faces strode forward, crossing the dense bushes as if they were crossing a meadow. They punched Roman's mirror spell, and a circle of ripples appeared in the air. The spell made a teeth-numbing sound like glass and shattered in an instant. The 3 ladies were so scared that their hair almost stood on end. They screamed and ran away. But how could they possibly outrun the ogre? Chiara was the first to be caught. The ogre in front of her reached out to grab her, but the little elf hurriedly knocked Chiara away, causing the ogre to grab empty air. Then, the 2 of them rolled into the nearby bushes. The ogre roared and lifted its foot to stomp on the ground. Seeing that the little elf and Chiara were about to be stomped into meat paste, Roman quickly stopped under a beech tree. He raised his hand and cast grease on the ogre's foot that was propped up on the ground. The ogre slid backward and fell to the ground with a loud bang. Perhaps this ogre was just too unlucky. When it fell, its head hit a moss-covered rock in the forest, creating a large hole in it and killing it instantly. When the remaining ogre saw that its comrade had died, it went berserk. It roared and swung its wooden club at the Roman. Chiara had no choice but to cover her head and roll away. The wooden club broke the beech tree she was hiding in and broke it into 2. The broken beech tree fell with a loud bang, and branches and leaves rustled onto the Roman. The latter calmly crawled through the gap between the beech tree and the ground. However, at the last moment, a branch caught her in her bag. Chiara pulled hard and tore a large hole in her bag. The caltrops and crystal beads in her bag fell to the ground. Although she was heartbroken, she did not pick them up and continued to crawl forward. On the other hand, the ogre behind her was unlucky. It stepped on the caltrops. These caltrops were originally prepared for war horses, so they were a little too small for an ogre. However, even a toothpick would hurt if it pierced the soles of the ogre's feet. The ogre could not help but scream and jump in pain. In the end, it stepped on the crystal beads, slipped, and fell on its back. Chiara, who had just crawled up from the bushes, saw this scene. She shouted, "Now!" Then she pushed the elf who was holding onto the corner of her clothes. The elf was still in a daze when she stood up with Chiara's clothes. She felt herself being pushed and stumbled forward, just in time to reach the ogre's huge head. Before she could see what was going on, she lost her balance and fell towards the ogre. Her subconscious action was to thrust the silver demon slayer spear forward into the ogre's wide-open mouth, penetrating it beautifully from the front to the back. Ah! The ogre was only halfway through its scream before it was deader than dead. The forest seemed to have quieted down. The goblins who were chasing after the ogre were dumbfounded when they saw this scene. As the saying goes, the fox uses the tiger's might to intimidate others. Even the tiger is dead. How could the fox use the tiger's might to intimidate others? For a moment they stood there, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. If they advanced, they might not be able to defeat the three ladies. This was proven in the previous battle. However, behind them, Miss Chiara was waving her magic wand and pointing it at them. Yes, it's you. Now it was Chiara's turn to intimidate others. She loudly gave an ultimatum. Hurry up and capture that shorty for me, and I'll spare your lives. If you want to run away. Humph. With the last word, Chiara waved the magic wand in her hand. A bolt of lightning struck a small sapling nearby, turning it into ashes. This spell was an elementalist spell. Obviously, it was a spell that came with the wand. The goblins immediately ran back the way they came, wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. Not long after, they carried a short, fat dwarf who was tied up into a ball and appeared in front of Roman, Chiara, and Wisp. They threw poor Mr. Boris Anvil to the ground and stood in a row, trembling with fear. It's you again. When Boris Fire Anvil saw the little elf, he couldn't help but flare up and struggle. Boris Anvil felt that he was really unlucky. Although he knew that this job was a little ridiculous, he felt that the risk was worth it for the sake of the money. He was just a small character. He was already favored by Gaia to be chosen by the big shot of the Empire to participate in such a huge plan. Besides, he was only responsible for a small part of the plan. There shouldn't be any big problems. He thought so too, but the nightmare started last night. To be exact, it started from the moment he saw these two seemingly harmless faces. First, he was sprayed with his proud alchemy work. Then, he was inexplicably thrown into the river. Poor old Boris. He had not touched water many times in his life, let alone swim. He hugged a piece of driftwood that flew out of nowhere and floated in the water all night, shivering. He finally met a group of goblins under Lady Shagos and fished himself out of the cold river. The precious alchemy potions and materials in his robe were almost all gone. He had not even set foot on dry and comfortable land for a few minutes before he was inexplicably beaten up by his own people and tied up like a dumpling. The Anvil family's dignity was completely gone. Before he could react, he saw the two little demons' faces again. You damn demons, why did you make fun of me? He shouted angrily. Before he could finish his sentence, Chiara kicked him hard, causing him to suck in a breath of cold air from the pain. You know this short and fat guy? Chiara pointed her magic wand at the dwarf's head and asked the elf. The elf glared fiercely at the dwarf. It's all his fault that the elf was discovered. He even wanted to use that green powder to stun the elf. This is bad. He must be a slave trader. Damn it. How could you do that to such a cute little girl? Chiara whipped the latter's face. I hate slave traders the most. I'm not. Boris Anvil replied angrily. I'm a law-abiding citizen. You still dare to lie. Chiara whipped his big nose again, causing the latter to wail in pain. Let me ask you, do law-abiding citizens mix with goblins? Boris Anvil was slightly stunned and hurriedly denied it. I was caught by them. Humph. Chiara smiled triumphantly. Let me ask you, were you with him before? Faced with the little girl's knife-like gaze, the goblins hurriedly nodded their heads. Then was he caught by you? The goblins shook their heads in unison. Ouch, said poor Mr. Polyanvil, who was struck in the ear again and wept with pain. I hate people who lie through their teeth the most, and with such little skill. Chiara poked the dwarf's forehead with her magic wand and said fiercely. This time the dwarf was like a deflated balloon, deflated. This guy is mixing with the goblins at this time, he must be up to something. Chiara excitedly reported to the Roman beside her. The latter was looking at his torn leather bag with heartache and said absent-mindedly, "Oh." However, Chiara did not seem to mind at all. She continued, "I think we can interrogate him properly. Maybe we can get some important information." Boris Anvil was shocked. Of course he knew some secrets, but it would cost him his life if he revealed them. He hurriedly shouted, "No, no. I am a noble, you have to treat the captive well." Before he could finish, he was whipped in the nose, causing him to cry out in pain and roll on the ground. "Shut up, I didn't ask you to speak." Chiara obviously did not have the words "treat the captive well" in her dictionary. Then she stepped on the dwarf and asked, "Let me ask you, whose subordinates are these goblins?" Boris Anvil kept his mouth shut and stared at Chiara, not saying a word. "Humph, I know even if you don't say it." Chiara rolled her eyes and thought of something. Goblins usually don't mix with ogres. It's not like there's a magical wave. If there's something similar to a magical wave nearby, there should be goblins and ogres in the army of Georgandy Ridge. Boris Anvil stared at her in fear. Got it right? Ouch! Another red mark appeared on the dwarf's face. He could not help but cry out in grief and indignation. "Why did you hit me again? You should be the one to answer this question, but you didn't. I answered for you, so of course I have to pay, right?" Chiara smiled proudly, showing her sharp, snow-white teeth. "I'll give you a discount this time, but next time you'll have to pay in full." Boris Anvil's face turned pale. He struggled and shouted, "Do you still have the demeanor of a noble?" But before he could finish his words, he received a solid blow. "This is a lady's privilege," Chiara answered matter-of-factly. "Then the second question, what do you do?" "I've said it before, I'm a law-abiding citizen of Kurlutz. You'll have to pay the price for treating me like this." Boris Anvil's face was red and blue, his messy beard trembling. He was about to go mad. Chiara pretended not to hear him. "You're a citizen of Cruz, but you're still with the goblins. Looks like you're a traitor." "Damn it, I'm not." "Then tell me, who do you serve?" "I said I'm not." Chiara snorted softly, turned around and asked the elf, "Little idiot, where did you meet this guy?" The elf looked at her with great dissatisfaction and replied, "I'm not a little idiot. If you want to prove that you're not an idiot, you have to tell me the whole story. Otherwise, how will I know whether you're an idiot or not?" Chiara answered. The elf puffed up her cheeks and replied angrily, "I met this bad guy in a candy shop." "Candy shop? That place is called Rove's Compass, it's a bread workshop," Jude added in annoyance. "So it was there." Chiara's eyes lit up. "So, that dragon was also lured here by you guys?" "Of course not. That dragon was lured here by the silver dragon." The silver dragon was a woman in white clothes at first. She picked up the little fairy's glowing ball, and then the dragon came. The little fairy retorted loudly, "What silver dragon, a woman in white?" Chiara asked with a frown. Xianni shook her head helplessly and recounted the events that had transpired back then. "Damn it! That's my shining tree seed." After hearing her words, the dwarf couldn't help but shout angrily, "You thieves! Shut up!" Chiara stomped on his stomach, making him curl up like a shrimp. "So you were really there at that time? Who were the people in the room? You're not going to tell me you don't know them, are you?" "Even if I know them, I won't tell you." Although Boris Anvil was sweating from the pain, he still answered firmly. Chiara stretched out a finger and shook her head in front of him. "Even if you don't tell me, I know. That older guy calls that woman Miss Delphine, and that woman calls him Uncle Solens. That woman is the daughter of the Prime Minister of Kurlutz, and Solens is the captain of the guards of the Nidevan family. That young man is called Effie, and he is Solens' deputy. And you, it seems that you should also be the alchemist of the Nydivan family, Boris Anvil, right? Boris Anvil looked at Kiera with fear, as if he was looking at a scourge. Who are you? How do you know so much? Kiera patted the dwarf's chubby cheeks with her magic wand. Don't pretend to be surprised. You haven't answered my question. How did you get together with the goblins? Strange, Kiera muttered to herself. Could it be that even the Prime Minister has joined Georgandy Ridge? Boris Anvil's face turned red and white. He was about to say something when Kiera interrupted him. Stupid dwarf, if I were you, I would think carefully before speaking. I'm not that little idiot over there. I'm not an idiot. Kiera ignored his words and continued. You can fool them, but you can't fool me. Let me guess. You obviously have another mission, but the others may not know. Let's assume that this mission was given by Prime Minister Nedwin or the old Prime Minister. If it was for Solens F or anyone else, then there's no need to hide it from Miss Delphian. That means your mission target can only be the Prime Minister's daughter. Boris Anvil opened his mouth and stared at her. His beard trembled as if he had seen something unbelievable. Kiera, of course, noticed the dwarf's expression. She smiled proudly. Looks like I'm right again. As she spoke, she whipped the dwarf's nose twice. The latter's tears flowed down his nose as he groaned. After receiving her reward from the dwarf, Kiara put away her magic wand in satisfaction. She tapped her lips and asked curiously, "But this is strange. Would the Prime Minister of the Empire harm his own daughter?" P.S. Begging for votes. Chapter 944. Chiara muttered to herself. The Roman seemed to have regained her composure. She turned around and asked, "What are you talking about, Chiara? I know that woman. She's a bad woman." "That's for you and that fellow." Chiara chuckled. "Although I can't rule out the possibility that the Prime Minister and his daughter don't get along, the possibility of that is very small. You can see that from the woman's arrogance and stubbornness. A daughter who isn't loved by her father wouldn't be able to do that, humph." Chiara snorted softly, obviously not having a good impression of the Prime Minister's daughter. However, the Roman did not ask her where she had seen the Prime Minister's daughter. Chiara quickly skipped the topic and stared at Boris Anvil. "In my opinion, it's more likely that this fellow is a traitor." Chiara stared at the pitiful Boris like a cat teasing its prey. Her beautiful sapphire-like eyes were filled with danger. In other words, Prime Minister Nydivan might not be the traitor, but this traitor is at least not far from the upper echelons of the Empire. Burly Fire Anvil trembled. He had thought that the other party was just a capricious noble lady who was throwing a tantrum. As long as she vented her anger on him, she would let him go. As for the matter of the Prime Minister's daughter, he didn't dare to say a single word. He thought that he could get away with it, but he didn't expect that he was only half right. This noble lady didn't like to reason with her defeated opponent, but she had a shrewdness that exceeded her age. He didn't say a single word, but the other party had already guessed most of it. Boris Anvil began to feel that he had chosen to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. He looked at Chiara as if he was looking at the legendary demons in hell who could see through people's hearts. "Why do you say that, Chiara?" the Roman asked. "Isn't it simple? Why would the Georgandy gang want the Prime Minister's daughter? If their target was the Prime Minister, they would not have done anything to Delphian. Prime Minister Nydivan might not be as good as his father, but he would not betray the Empire for a daughter. On the contrary, doing so would only anger him." Chiara answered with disdain. It was as if these schemes were written in an open book to her. There were no secrets to be found. So even though they knew that this would anger the Prime Minister, they still did it. Who would have such an idea? This person must be Nydivan's enemy. Maybe it's just revenge, or maybe it's to make the Prime Minister do something wrong. But no matter which it is, most people would not make enemies with the Prime Minister. Even if they did, they would not have the ability to retaliate. Those who could do this would at least have the same status and identity as the Prime Minister. Because only a conflict of interest will lead to hatred. A mediocre lower-class noble or a small workshop owner, who works hard to make a living would never have anything to do with the Prime Minister of the Empire. Is that what you mean? The Roman answered with his unique businessman's logic. That's a good analogy. In fact, there are only a few people like that in the Empire. There are only a few dukes, the commanders of a few large legions, the leaders of local nobles, or the higher-ups of the Holy Cathedral of Fire. Kiara nodded. The little elf was confused. She looked at the demon slayer spear in the mouth of the ogre, thought for a moment, and pulled it out in disgust. Then she rubbed the spear on the nearby grass, trying to clean up the dirty blood. Chiara raised her eyebrows as if she had found a new point of suspicion. There's something more interesting. This guy is with the goblins and he's related to Georgandy Ridge. She poked the dwarf's big nose again with her magic wand. It's more likely that the person who is related to Georgandy Ridge isn't him, but the big shot behind him. That's interesting. Someone in the Empire's high-ranking officials has betrayed the Empire. No wonder Georgandy Ridge's invasion was so timely, and the situation on the surface was so clear. Stop talking, you demon. Boris's face turned ashen. How dare you tell me to shut up? It seems that you still don't understand your situation, Chiara said fiercely. But when she saw the dwarf's pleading expression, she changed her mind. All right, since you're so pitiful, I won't say anything. But in exchange you have to tell me what you plan to do to that woman, Delphian. She has a grudge against that guy, but she appeared at this place at this time. You're not going to tell me that it's a coincidence, are you? It's Count Delphian, the dwarf said, trembling. His son, Elman, died because of that heroine, but he believes that Miss Delphian was the one who instigated his son to avenge Vahina. That's why she should be responsible for it. He deliberately lent the demon slayer spear to Miss Delphian in the hope that she would perish together with that heroine. What's the demon slayer spear? Roman asked. It's a weapon that's been passed down in the family for generations. I heard that it's almost as powerful as a subdivine artifact. Ah, then will Brando be fine? The merchant girl was shocked. Don't worry. That guy is so lucky that even a demon can't kill him. A mere demon slayer spear won't be able to do anything to him, Chiara said disdainfully. She stepped on the dwarf with the tip of her foot. Count Floyd hopes that the Prime Minister's daughter will perish together with that guy. What, does the demon slayer spear have the ability to self-destruct? I don't read much, so don't lie to me. Boris shuddered. Miss Delphian wanted to wait for that heroine to arrive at the imperial capital before making her move. My mission was to persuade her to come here, and find a chance to expose her to the people of Georgandy Ridge. How did you persuade her? Tell her that the guy won't go to the imperial capital because he's leading the subterranean dwellers to cause trouble for the Empire. He'll fight his way to Rushta, and even if he can't, he'll retreat to Erewhon. Tell her that the people of Erewhon and Georgandy Ridge have formed an alliance with Toquinen, right? Let me think, that guy has a team of subterranean dwellers as his bodyguards. This way this scam doesn't make sense. Chiara analyzed word by word while tapping her wand. Boris seemed to have heard something unbelievable. He couldn't help but open his mouth wide. Chiara's analysis was exactly the same as their original plan. But there's still a question. How did Count Floyd know that the people of Georgandy Ridge would appear here? Because he's a traitor. The elf interrupted in a daze. Poor Boris seemed to have just thought of this question. He looked at Chiara with pleading eyes, hoping that she would be just a little bit stupid or just confused for a moment. Unfortunately, Chiara disappointed his hopes. She shook her head confidently. If Count Floyd is a traitor, why would he offend the Chancellor over such a small matter? Wouldn't that be exposing himself? This guy's mouth isn't honest. The way I see it, Count Floyd is most likely kept in the dark. He's just being used. She looked at Boris mockingly. I didn't know that you were a multi-faced spy. This person wants to deal with the Chancellor of the Empire and has Count Floyd take the blame for him. He seems to be a big shot. Can you tell your employer who he is? The dwarf trembled in fear, but he didn't dare to say a word. You must think that if you don't say a word, a soft-hearted little girl like me won't dare to do anything to you, right? Chiara became angry. Fine, I won't kill you. But now that I know so much, I can announce to the public that you told me. You see, you can't tell your master that I guessed all of this out of thin air, right? You can't do that. I didn't tell you anything. You can't lie, you demon. Poor Boris yelled. What a soft-hearted little girl. Sunny whispered to the elf. Both of them shuddered. You can't stop me from saying this, just like I can't force you to speak, Chiara said to the dwarf. But if you tell me the cause and effect, I can let you go. No one in this war knows that you're still alive, right? The dwarf breathed heavily, but he still didn't dare to speak. Humph, it seems that the person behind the scenes has made you very afraid. You are so afraid that even if you hide your identity, he will still be able to find you. This person must have unimaginable power. In this way, although you did not say anything, the number of people we suspect has decreased further. There are only 2 or 3 people. Chiara saw the dwarf's expression for a moment, and it was as if she could read the message in his eyes. Just kill me, you devil, Boris Fire Anvil shouted weakly. You might as well kill me. I won't kill you. I'm a virtuous lady. But sometimes I wish I wasn't an elegant noble lady. That way I could cast some spells on you. There are very few secrets that people can keep. Roman suddenly thought of something and said, Chiara, I think I know that kind of spell too. Chiara was slightly stunned. She only said that to scare the poor old dwarf, but she didn't expect that someone around her would use such a spell. Seeing into the future was the domain of astrology, and prying into people's hearts was the domain of black magic. Chiara looked at Roman in surprise, but she more or less had some guesses about his identity. She asked the merchant lady curiously, Do you want to try? I've never seen such a spell before. I'm not sure either, Roman replied excitedly, because this is a dangerous spell, and there are unknown dangers to both the caster and the target. That's why I haven't tried it either. Perhaps the effect is limited, or it could turn someone into a drooling idiot. Why don't we give it a try? I beg of you, respectable human ladies, even if it's for the sake of your own health, since this is a dangerous spell, I think it's best if we avoid it from happening. At the thought of turning into a drooling idiot, Boris Anvil couldn't help but wail. That won't do. Chiara shook her head in dissatisfaction. The pursuit of truth is not to be afraid of hardships. How can we shrink back in the face of a little danger? Roman nodded vigorously. He felt that the little girl had spoken his mind. Compared to danger, curiosity and fun were more important. Prepare to cast the spell, Miss Roman. Chiara looked at the dwarf and said solemnly, Knowledge and truth will remember your contribution, Mr. Dwarf. Before that, may I have the honor of knowing your name? Poor Boris Anvil finally broke down. He couldn't help but cry like a child. Damn it, don't turn me into an idiot. I'll tell you whatever you want to know. That won't do, Roman said anxiously, as if she was afraid of losing the chance to cast the spell. But this time Chiara stopped the merchant girl. The dwarf was almost scared to death. Chiara pointed her magic wand at the tip of his nose and said, You're so useless. You're already an adult and you're still crying. Tell me, who's the person behind you? The dwarf replied with tears and snot. Damn it, sob sob sob, I really don't know who that is. But I know the person who contacted me. He's called Freeman, a member of the Royal Archaeological Society. Who's that? Roman asked. Freeman Lillis. My brother told me about him before. He's the vice-chairman of the Royal Archaeological Society of Crews. He's from the Lillis family. Have you heard of this family? They're part of the Cecil faction. Roman sat on a moss-covered rock with her knees together. Her round boots stepped on a piece of rotten wood. She rested her elbows on her thighs and supported her chin. She looked at Chiara with her bright eyes, implying that she didn't understand anything. But Chiara was still interested. The Cecil family is the noble family closest to the Holy Cathedral of Fire. Since he's from this faction, it means that he's related to the Holy Cathedral of Fire. But the Holy Cathedral of Fire would never collude with Georgandy Ridge. The other party's choice of contact is very interesting. This person is probably a pawn that they've deliberately chosen to stir up trouble. So you're saying that we can't know who's behind this? Sunil asked while lying on the head of the elf. The latter was already confused and squatted on the ground to count the ants. Fortunately, there were many colorful insects in the forest for her to identify. Has he schemed against you? Chiara looked at Miss Drake curiously. Not really. But according to you humans, when we're in the middle of such a huge conspiracy, don't you think it's more immersive for me to say this? Sunil spread out her claws and replied. That's true. This is indeed a fun game. Chiara's eyes lit up. But Miss Sunil, you're wrong about one thing. Although the clues are broken here, in other words, there's still other information. The person who designed all of this is even willing to implicate the Holy Cathedral of Fire. This means at least two things. Either he's not afraid of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, or he's a fearless fool. But if a fool can do this, I can only admit that I'm a fool. So there's only one possibility. Maybe you're wrong. That person could be a high-level spy that the Holy Cathedral of Earth has placed in the Holy Cathedral of Fire. Sunil rested her chin on her claws and asked deliberately. She seemed to have fallen in love with this mystery game. First, I can't be wrong. Second, why do I say that I can't be wrong? Because if that person is a spy from the Holy Cathedral of Fire, any spy will always have something suspicious about him. The only difference is how much and how little. The only way for such a person to not be discovered is not to make himself unsuspicious, but to reduce the attention of others as much as possible. So what he should do is to not let anyone suspect him. But now he's doing this. So when we think it's him, the answer may be the opposite of ours. After hearing this, Miss Drake was convinced by a human for the first time. What surprised her was that this human looked like a little girl of about 10 years old. Even her voice was still childish. Chiara poked the dejected dwarf with her magic wand. Since these goblins can recognize you, you must have a contact among the Georgiandi rich people. It's Miss Shagos. Boris Anvil replied weakly. Who's that? An underground lizard man. I only know her name, but she should know of my existence. That means she knows about your mission, or at least knows that you're here for some reason. The dwarf's face changed. What do you want? Nothing. You can rest first. Chiara smiled proudly. She turned around and raised her hand to give Roman a high five. Don't you need to cast that spell? Roman asked curiously as he hugged his bag. Not for now. Chiara shook her head. But do you really know how to cast that spell? I know a little, but the so-called mind-reading spell can only tell a person's current emotions. For example, whether you are angry or happy, this spell can reveal your true emotions and let the caster feel it. Roman thought for a moment and answered seriously in a low voice. This is in the category of black magic. Can this spell really turn people into idiots? Chiara asked. Roman glanced at the dwarf. No spell can turn an idiot back into an idiot, Chiara. Chiara agreed. Think so too. P.S. I want to warn those who spread rumors about me in the book review section that I don't even know how to count. Let me tell you, after 2 it's 4. There's no such thing as 3 in this world. 3 is just your imagination. It's a conspiracy. Chapter 945. The Shire. Here we are. Hippamera. I'm here, my lord. Lady Maynard. The female knight hid behind a dragon blood tree and nodded to Brando from afar. Translator. Nyarbo Studio Editor. Nyarbo Studio. The afternoon sun filled the entire valley, but the valley was silent. Looking down from the dense branches, the first thing that came into view was a slender and beautiful back. Dark and shiny scales were arranged closely in order, followed by a pair of huge bat wings and a curled neck. At the top of the neck was a skull. It was a dragon. She lay quietly in the valley, and her huge body almost filled the whole valley. Some small creatures were busy around her. On the light screen where Charles was using the peeping spell, goblins, earth goblins, and some kobolds were shown. The giant dragon seemed to be resting. Its rubbery eyelids were lowered, and it was motionless. Only its long tail was wagging occasionally. Earl Alcorn looked at the elegant and huge creature with some fear. This dragon was slightly smaller than the one they saw last night. It should be the black dragon that left alone. At his signal, Sir Cooper asked, "What should we do, Mr. Captain?" Mr. Captain, since last night's battle, this title had become the official title of the surviving nobles of Cruz to Brando. Brando understood that this subconsciously represented the rise of his status in the hearts of these people, but it was hard to say how much this rise would do. He also glanced at the valley, then shook his head gently. This dragon happened to cut off their path, which was really unfortunate. It's lying here basking in the sun, which means it hasn't found us. Maybe it's resting, or maybe it's waiting for Malthus. We'll wait until evening. If it doesn't move by evening, we'll have to find a way to take a detour. He turned back to Yuta and said, "Be careful of its servants. Don't let the goblins and kobolds find us." Gather everyone, hide in a valley, and set up a perimeter. Don't be afraid to kill. The dragon is unlikely to remember its humble servants. As long as there are some left, it won't be suspicious. Yuta carefully remembered every word, and her sexy figure disappeared into the dense forest. Cooper couldn't help but look in that direction greedily. A squirrel crawled on Brando's shoulder all the way to the ground, then it turned its head, raised its little head, and stared at the Roman with its black eyes. This was White Mist. She was the Roman's familiar, and the two would naturally sense each other within a certain distance. As the guardian chosen by the Witch Queen herself, as long as she and the Roman were within the same boundary, she would be able to locate the Roman. In fact, she had sent messages between the Roman and Brando 2 or 3 times, but the latter was blocked on the other side of the valley by the dragon named Modesti. The Roman first asked her to deliver the message, including the dwarf's confession and Chiara's speculation. That was how Brando found out that the valley was actually the camp of the lizard lady, Shagos. White Mist let the Roman and the rest stay there. We'll meet up in the evening. Tell them to be careful, don't run around, and don't cause any trouble. Okay. White Mist was silent in front of anyone, as if she only had the patience to answer with an okay, in front of Brando or the Roman. The little prince, who was squatting beside Brando, was itching to stroke the squirrel's furry head with his fingers. As a result, White Mist mercilessly bit his finger, scaring him so much that he quickly retracted his hand and covered his finger. This is a familiar? Haruz looked at the grass where White Mist disappeared and asked curiously. Familiars come in all kinds of forms, and they don't need to be alive, so it doesn't have to be a squirrel. The most famous witch in history, Beatrice, used a butterfly made of pure gold as her familiar. Brando replied. He touched the latter's head and replied somewhat dotingly, "You will also have a familiar. Although not every wizard has a familiar, I will definitely find you the best one." "Thank you, teacher." Haruz's eyes widened. "But teacher, can I have a squirrel as my familiar? Why do you like squirrels so much? They look cute, don't they?" The little prince replied with a red face. Brando held his forehead, almost defeated by this prince. He thought to himself, do you dare to have some normal hobbies, such as a mighty shadow cheetah or something, or a cool colorful salamander that can make its owner invisible, or a dragon as your familiar like Tumen? Isn't that what a boy should aspire to? He patted Haruz on the shoulder. "I'm afraid not." Oh, Haruz looked very disappointed. Brando smiled slightly. As a teacher, the proudest thing was to meet a good student. But a student like Haruz, who had an unimaginable talent in ancient magic, who was born noble but was not arrogant at all, and who obeyed his teacher's every word, was rare even among good students. Haruz's talent in black magic could indeed be described as terrifying. Ancient magic, the earliest magic of Wand, shared the same origin as witchcraft, runic spells and spiritual spells, which the witches claimed to have magic in words and language. These magic actually came from the obscurity of the dark, the exploration of the unknown by the law. They were part of the dark magic itself, and even today witches still use such power. Ancient magic was very different from today's magic system. Most of the ancient spells' incantations were lengthy and slow. The spellcasting movements were complicated and strict, and the casting environment was extremely demanding. Most of the ancient magic was derived from array spells and runic spells, as well as the unique string spells of the dragons and witchcraft. The most important part of casting ancient magic was to display runes and formations, which were only used in array spells in today's magic system. In fact, there were simplified ways to shorten the casting time by drawing a magic circle in advance, but this method did not work in the ancient magic system. Ancient magic required the spellcaster to be able to instantly form a magic circle and display the correct runes at the same time. This required a wizard's innate talent to reach a terrifying level. It required extraordinary magic sensitivity, namely the bloodline attribute, as well as terrifying elemental sensitivity, to accommodate countless runes under the 4 major elemental laws, as well as an almost limitless capacity for the spirit, namely the mana pool. Otherwise, one would not be able to activate those astronomical spells. As early as the Age of Silver, there were very few people who could master ancient magic, but all this was easily solved for Haruz. Brando suspected that the young prince's talent was the Twin Pact, or something like the Blue Calamity. He had never seen Haruz overly tired from casting spells, which meant that he could practice spells from morning to night without the help of the Wizard Tower's mana pool, and he could still be as energetic the next day. Similarly, an apprentice could master 7 to 9 runes, depending on their talent. Most players could learn elemental magic or rune magic at a fixed rate of 10, which was already considered an extraordinary talent in the eyes of the NPCs. When Romain learned witchcraft, he mastered 15 runes during his apprenticeship, which made Brendel extremely jealous. As for the young prince, he had mastered 14 runes so far. The reason why he was one less than the Roman was that Brando and the Wind Empress could only teach him that much in the past 3 months. That was to say, the young prince had mastered as much as they taught him. Haruz could only perform some small tricks now, and he was not even an apprentice. He could only be considered a beginner. Who was the protagonist here? For a moment, Brando could not help but doubt his own life. He suspected that he might have transmigrated to this world to open the door to the young prince's future. And in all kinds of stories and legends, people like him usually didn't have a good ending. If this story was evil, then he would definitely be pierced through the heart by the little prince in the future, and then the latter would say something very cool, for example, "Teacher, now I don't need you anymore." Or something like that. If this story was night-oriented, then he would most likely die in front of Haruz because of something, and then the latter would finally wake up and embark on the path of the strong. Brando glanced at the young prince's delicate face and thought that it was most likely the second development. But it was impossible for him to give up teaching Haruz now, because the average player could never have Haruz's talent. Players were born with heroic attributes slightly weaker than the prophets, and Haruz was almost certainly a chosen one. His personality was his biggest flaw, which could be said to be negligible among the chosen ones Brando had seen. What was more terrifying was that he might also have the talent of fate and an extremely outstanding bloodline talent. This delicate young prince was the legendary Face King, and Haruz listened to him. Felt like he was leveling up with a cheat. Brando knew the direction of the future and understood what kind of class combination was the strongest. Coupled with Haruz's talent, he could imagine what kind of monster he was creating. That feeling was absolutely irresistible to him. The future of a wizard often depended on the direction of his development. Some people were limited by their talent, some by their personality, but more people were limited by their knowledge. There were many outstanding geniuses in history who were buried because their mentor was nothing more than a charlatan. Even a court mage's knowledge was often limited by his lifetime of learning. Not everyone had the complete and complex inheritance system of the craftsmen of Buga. It was impossible for players to have the talent of the legendary natives, but natives rarely had the ability to plan their classes so strictly as players, even down to each level. But Brando had it. Although he might not be able to find some things in a short time, he knew what was best. He would never replace the young prince with something temporarily. Some things, once missed when laying the foundation, were likely to become a lifelong regret. Brando wanted to see how far his student could go in the future when the two were combined. As far as he knew, there were several body-level wizards among the players, but their talent was not as abnormal as Haruz. Of course, Haruz and even his sister did not know what kind of path his teacher had prepared for him. For him, what he was worried about now was how to become a qualified king. The throne was an annoying burden for him, far less interesting than following his teacher to other countries. Although the journey was full of danger and fear, it was very exciting. After answering Haruz's question, Brando glanced at the valley again, as if to confirm the terrain or the distribution of the lizardman's camp. This was like a natural habit for him, a subconscious behavior. After memorizing the nearby terrain, he waved to the others and motioned everyone to retreat into the dense forest. After the group quietly retreated into the bushes, the Shire stopped peeping. Brando asked the others, "How was it?" "I smell a conspiracy, my lord," the Shire replied. "Nonsense," Brando reprimanded angrily. "2 of the 3 dragons plus Queen Medusa have already appeared in the surface world. Jorgendy Ridge is making such a big fuss. It can't be that they are just here to be bystanders." "What is bystanders?" Sir Cooper was stunned. "Soy sauce is a kind of tea. You know, afternoon tea, right? My lord means that these stinky guys are not here to invite you to tea," the Shire kindly explained, but Maynard couldn't help but look at Brando very strangely after hearing this explanation. The latter's expression didn't change as he continued. Lady Shagos is the confidant of the Lizard King. Most of the underground lords don't get along well with each other. Since Modesty dared to stop here, it means that their relationship is not as simple as a joint invasion of the surface world, but a closer alliance. I suspect that the Minotaur King Geralt and the Dragon Queen have also arrived on the surface. Since Modesty and Malthus are here, the Dragon Queen Gwendolen naturally won't act alone. Since 4 of the 5 underground lords have already moved out, why would the remaining Minotaur King Geralt stay alone in Jorgendy Ridge? Jorgendy Ridge has already turned out in full force, Brando said quietly. His voice was like a ghost. A cold wind passed through the forest in the afternoon, making everyone shiver involuntarily. This sentence is now not just an adjective but a statement, and it is very likely to be very close to the facts we know now. The 5 underground lords have joined forces, plus characters like the Lizard King and the Blind King. Their voices are likely to be transmitted to every corner of the dark underground. For a moment the forest was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. What do you mean by that? Earl Alcorn finally asked. It means that you are lucky enough to have witnessed the birth of the only grand unification in the underground world of Jorgendy Ridge since thousands of years ago, or even in history. Now that they have collectively appeared on the surface world, they are about to become a new witness of this holy war. They are not just a sudden force but a new player. Imagine, when the entire army of Jorgendy Ridge poured into the world on the surface. That's impossible. Cooper sucked in a breath of cold air. It's unlikely from a common-sense point of view, but if the 5 underground lords have all appeared on the surface, then they will never leave any other lords in the underground world to threaten their rule. These underground lords are all cunning and astute. I don't think they are inferior to all of you here, Brando replied. Earl Alcorn chose to remain silent. But what's their reason for doing so? Cooper asked. They have been in the underground world for thousands of years. I'm not sure about that, Brando shook his head. But there may be someone in the Empire who knows. You mean the person who attacked little Nydiven's daughter? Earl Alcorn asked. Brando nodded. For a moment no one chose to answer. According to the information from the Roman, there were only 3 people in the entire empire who could do this. The Supreme of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, the Patriarch of the Cecil family, the Patriarch of the Firat family, or half of Grand Duke Kirk. Among these few people, except for the Supreme of the Holy Cathedral of Fire, the rest were possible. But among these people, who would dare to say that they had betrayed the empire? Who could make such a judgment so hastily? Perhaps even Her Majesty the Queen would have to think twice before acting. Martha blessed the Empire. Cooper couldn't help but murmur in a low voice. How is Miss Delphian's condition? Brando suddenly confirmed with Hippamra. The priestess shook her head slowly. She's not in a good condition. Her wounds are suppurating, her lungs are infected, her fever is very high, and all her organs are beginning to fail. I've performed a dispelling spell on her, but the effect is not obvious. What did the people of Jorgendy Ridge want from Delphian? Brando couldn't help but feel a little strange for a moment. The sooner the crew's people found the traitor, the sooner they could reverse the situation of the battlefield. But this cold dagger was hidden so deep that the fate of the entire empire was tied to a dying paranoid woman. It was hard not to think that this was a punishment for the arrogance of the crew's people, just like the Myrna people in the past. P.S. Begging for monthly votes. Chapter 946. Modesty narrowed her eyes as she watched the little creatures pacing back and forth in front of her. The goblins and kobolds offered her fresh prey, such as elk and wild boar from the forest. They placed the prey in front of Modesty's mouth and retreated far away, as if they were afraid that the dragon would swallow them in one gulp. However, Modesty did not have much of an appetite. She only opened her eyes occasionally to scare the little creatures away, and took pleasure in it. She was indeed waiting for someone, but it was not Malthus nor the soulless dwarf. It was Guku, Gwendolen's servant. Not long after Brando and the others left, Guku arrived. She descended from the sky with a group of harpies, causing a commotion in the camp. Modesty narrowed her eyes as she looked at the little creature. She was a rare harpy with emerald green feathers, but at the moment, she was in an extremely sorry state. There were many burn marks on her wings, and a few of the long feathers on her head were missing. Looks like you've run into a little trouble. The black dragon's tone was a little gloating. A few insects snuck into Greystone Town. Useless Tammy. Guku replied with the sharp voice of a harpy. She was indignant. She was not only referring to Brando and the others who snuck into Greystone Town, but also Malthus. Her burnt feathers were all thanks to Malthus, which made her very angry. She was Gwendolyn's servant, so she was not worried about any verbal offense. In her eyes, Malthus was not as powerful as her master. Of course, if she were to face Malthus alone, she would never dare to say such a thing. Modesty's lips curled up. She did not care about the little creature's sarcastic retort. After all, it had nothing to do with her. She said playfully, "Your master, that woman asked me to wait for you here." Praise the master. Guko finally showed a respectful expression. This attitude made Modesty a little unhappy. Although she had to admit that Gwendolyn was the strongest among the 3 dragons, a dragon was a dragon. She would not easily show her fear in front of outsiders. Modesty sniffed, and a small flame rose from the canopy nearby. The air was suddenly filled with the smell of sulfur. She coldly interrupted Guku and said, "My time is limited. Have you found that person? The person your master asked you to look for?" Guku seemed to have sensed the change in the attitude of the female dragon in front of her. She hesitated for a moment before answering, "No, I couldn't find her. Those humans were too powerful. I could only see them from afar. Then Lord Malthus and the city was in chaos, and I took advantage of the chaos." "You can't even ask," Modesty said disdainfully. However, she was not disappointed at all. To be honest, she did not care about the plan of those humans at all. She and Malthus did not come here for this matter. They were just here to help Gwendolyn. Even Modesty herself felt strange. Why would that woman be so obedient to a mere human? She was simply an idiot. However, she did not dare to say this out loud. After all, she was no match for Gwendolyn. She frowned and asked impatiently, "You only arrived now. You must have returned to Greystone Town after the incident. Did you find her body?" Although Modesty was absent-minded, it did not mean that she was not meticulous enough. On the contrary, the long life and experience of dragons gave them wisdom far beyond that of mortals. "The city has long been reduced to ruins. There is no way to find it," Guku replied awkwardly. "However, there are no human corpses left in the city. There are only some remains of gargoyles. I think they were left behind by the humans who snuck in." Modesty was originally absent-minded and had just asked casually. However, when she heard the words gargoyles, she jumped up as if someone had stepped on her tail. "Gargoyles? Are you sure?" The harpy was slightly startled. She stared at Modesty with some uncertainty, not understanding what kind of reaction this was. The black dragon raised her head and said angrily to herself, "Damn it, so he didn't pass by Greystone Town. There are no human corpses left at the scene. This means that someone has cleaned up the battlefield. It can't be Malthus. He must have gone after that bitch Mithril. Damn it. They must have escaped. No, they can't have gone far. They wouldn't dare to stay in Greystone Town. They must be hiding in the hills near the silver-gushing valley." She said "damn it" twice in a row, which was enough to prove her anger at the moment. In the whole of Anslova, only one person had a large number of gargoyles at the moment, and she and Malthus could be said to have come for this person. To be exact, they came for the Halrangaya in his hand. The last time that person disappeared was before Jorgandi Ridge began to attack Anzaruta. Modesty originally thought that according to the speed of the other party, he should have left the Bear Lake area long ago. However, she did not know that Brando did not abandon the crew's nobles. He also wanted to avoid the detection of Jorgandi Ridge, so he chose the difficult hilly area all the way. At this moment, when she heard Guka's description, she realized that she had missed something. She could not help but secretly curse that idiot Malthus. It was right in front of you, and you didn't even notice it. What a waste of a pair of eyes. Modesty was furious. No wonder we temporarily sensed the existence of the Halrangaya last night. Damn it. The Halrangaya, Guku exclaimed. In her vision, the black dragon suddenly stood up and spread its wings. The huge wings almost covered the entire valley. The latter began to flap its wings, and the surrounding goblins and kobolds were blown away by the wind. Even Guku could not stand still. She flew along with the wild wind and screamed, "Lady Modesty? Listen carefully." Modesty said coldly, "The mission that Jalindalin asked you to complete is to make sure that the woman cannot leave Anslova, whether temporarily or permanently. You don't have to find her. I believe you understand what I mean." Lady Modesty, could she be with those people? That woman came for revenge. She can't be with this guy. The Black Dragon sneered. The Black Dragon sneered. But if they are together, it will save me a lot of trouble. I will make your master thank me properly. Modesty's voice was still echoing in the valley, but the dragon had already rushed into the sky. Everyone in the valley looked up and could only see a small shadow in the sky. Hiding in the forest on the mountainside in the distance, a few Lolas were blown away by the wind. But before the wild wind calmed down, Chiara rushed over and grabbed Roman's sleeve. She asked loudly, "How is it? How is it? Did you hear it? What are they talking about?" "Shoo." Roman turned around and put his index finger to his lips to make a shushing gesture. "Keep your voices down." "Then did you hear it?" Chiara asked again in a low voice. Roman nodded and repeated the conversation between the dragon and the harpy. After listening to her description, Chiara cheered softly. Chiara had her eyes on Lady Shagos from the very beginning. She wanted to get more information from her. As for the danger, she had never considered that kind of thing. Curiosity was not something that could be stopped by danger. This was not an empty phrase. But even she did not expect that the whole thing would go so smoothly, just like she did not expect to meet a dragon in the valley. She said proudly, "See? We came to the right place. Although I did not expect that the dragon would be here, they are obviously looking for Delphian. This explains a lot." "Is that so?" Roman asked, puzzled. "Of course," Chiara answered firmly. Her eyes flashed with a kind of moving brilliance. It was a look of wanting to see the world in chaos. "The nature of this matter is different now. Don't you understand, Roman? This is not just a human's conspiracy. There are dragons involved. Whether it is Count Floyd or the Prime Minister of the Empire, it is impossible for them to make the dragon move. The facts have proven everything that I have described. In the entire empire, there are only a few people who can do this. No, in fact there are only two. Have you guessed who it is?" Roman may not have understood the meaning of this sentence, but he still asked curiously out of instinct. "My intuition tells me that it should be so, but reason tells me that it is impossible," Chiara answered cautiously. But anyone could see that she was trembling with excitement, as if she was not facing a huge conspiracy, but a very interesting puzzle. "No, we should choose to believe in reason first. I still need more evidence." She licked her lips. It was probably the meaning of the phrase "birds of a feather flock together." The three of them who wanted to see the world in chaos understood this sentence at the same time. They all subconsciously looked at the bushes not far away. Somewhere, a certain unlucky dwarf seemed to have felt a chill, and could not help but struggle and groan. Chiara kicked him. "Don't make a sound." She then cracked her knuckles and turned back. "Well, now we will follow the original plan and execute the script that has been written." "But Brando told us not to get into trouble," Roman said worriedly. "This is not getting into trouble," Chiara snorted. "This is helping him. That guy is good at everything, but he is too stupid. If I don't do something, I'm afraid that he will be sold and help count the money. Of course, in principle that guy and I are enemies, but I am still part of this diplomatic group. I don't have the habit of dying with others, so I can only reluctantly help him. Besides, Chiara blushed. "It's nothing. Just blame me for being too kind." But the little elf could not see how this human girl who was about her age was kind. She could not help but frown as she tried very hard to repair her shattered worldview. Chiara's original plan was very simple. It was to let poor Bully Anvil go to Lady Shagos to get information. Now there might be a harpy involved. This plan was absolutely bold because once the old dwarf entered the camp, it meant that he was out of their control. Therefore, the first difficulty of this plan was to persuade Bully Anvil to believe that if he dared to do so, the gains would not make up for the losses. Chiara's persuasion was very simple. She only patted the dwarf's chubby face and told him, This is a good chance for you to prove that you did not betray us and that you have nothing to do with this matter. You won't be stupid enough to give us away, will you? You see, since you have betrayed them and there is no way to make up for it, the news we got from you has already spread. So what you need to do now is to get rid of the matter. You escaped from Greystone Town without meeting anyone on the way, and there is no chance for the news to leak, right? The old dwarf's face was red. If he had an axe in his hand, he would have jumped up and challenged Chiara to a duel. Although a duel with a human girl was not something to be proud of, it was better than being humiliated like this. Unfortunately, Bolly Anvil was not as stubborn as his kind. They could endure the monotonous mining work in the underground tunnel day after day, as if such a rigid character had been integrated into the blood of their race. But he was different. He was a dwarf who pursued freedom and pleasure. He had always been proud of his maverick ways. Except for this moment, Bolly Anvil had never hated his weakness as much as he did now. A moment ago, he was solemnly swearing that once he escaped, he would avenge himself no matter what. But after Chiara untied him, he could not help but hesitate. Perhaps Chiara was right. He drifted all the way from Greystone Town to this place, and he did not meet any humans along the way. He and the people he was looking for in Georgandy Ridge were two completely different routes. If he did not say anything, no one would suspect him. He could even calmly report the situation to Lady Shagos, whom he had never met before, and pretend that nothing had happened. After all, everything that happened in Greystone Town had nothing to do with him. It was all the fault of that damned black dragon. He could not blame himself for being too incompetent. After this matter was over, he could happily be an alchemist and pretend that nothing had happened. After thinking about it for a moment, Boris Fire Anvil's mind became active. He rubbed his wrists as he walked out of the forest. At first he could not help but feel a little nervous. But after a while, he returned to normal and got into the zone. The three ladies followed behind him under the cover of Roman's invisibility spell. Chiara even whispered to the former, "Just report what you wanted to report to that lovely lizard lady. You don't have to make up any lies. You don't have to worry about being exposed." When the dwarf heard that, he felt a sense of relief. He could not help but feel grateful to Chiara, even though the feeling came out of nowhere. But after a while, Chiara threatened, "But if we are unlucky enough to be captured, we will betray you immediately. As reliable companions, we must go through thick and thin together. This is the quality that nobles should have." Poor Mr. Bolly Anvil's face darkened when he heard that. Even Shani, who was lying on the elf's head, could not help but roll her eyes. For a moment, only the Roman was still in high spirits. Regardless of what old Bolly was thinking at the moment, Chiara, who was under the effect of the invisibility spell, turned around and looked at the elf. They were actually under an invisible curtain. This witch's spell was similar to Brando's cloak of the Giant King. It could also block sight and breath, and they could also see each other. The only flaw was that it could be detected by detection spells. Fortunately, the goblins and kobolds did not pay attention to this. The elf looked at Chiara with some fear and subconsciously tightened her grip on the demon-slaying spear in her hand. The latter said fiercely, "Remember what I said? Don't be soft-hearted later." The elf quickly nodded. Bolly Anvil soon arrived outside the camp. The goblins and kobolds obviously did not have the concept of vigilance. Besides, modesty did not need to be vigilant. Who would suddenly find trouble with a real dragon? If there really was such a person, the goblins and kobolds would not be able to guard against it. When the little creatures saw the dwarf approaching, they reacted in a flurry. For a moment the camp was filled with screams. The kobolds were known as the descendants of the dragon in many legends, but their barks were genuine dog barks, which was how they got their name. The little creatures barked together and carefully pointed their spears at the old dwarf. The latter gestured, and finally, he explained his purpose of coming. At this time, Chiara saw a kobold in a long robe coming out of the camp with a strange expression. He held a staff and gestured at the dwarf from afar. "Kobold mentor." Shani wanted to cover her face with her claws. She could not help but look at the human girl beside her. Didn't they say that kobolds would never use such high-end magic detection? Damn it. Chiara was shocked and could not help but complain. These kobolds are a little different from the ones on the surface. Now is not the time to complain. What should we do? Shani was trembling with fear. Although the kobolds and goblins were nothing to be afraid of, there were at least hundreds of them around at the moment. If they were suddenly exposed, even if each of them had a spear, they would turn into hedgehogs. She did not want to become a hedgehog. Lady Shani's adventure on the continent had just begun. Although the elf did not understand what was going on, she knew that it was not a good thing. She was already very nervous, and now she was so scared that she was about to cry. Chapter 947. At the end of the day, Chiara was still a child. Even though her analysis was logical, it was inevitable that she would be at a loss when faced with a real problem. The dog-headed tutor came to Boris Anvil's side with his staff and pretended to cast a spell. Chiara and the little elf could not help but turn pale with fright. It was at this moment that the Roman let out a soft gasp and muttered, "That's strange, there are no ripples of magic on the staff." Chiara and Shani also noticed that something was not right. Even though the dog-headed tutor's spell-casting action looked decent, the incantation that it was uttering was not the case at all. Not to mention, when it cast the spell, the lines of law in the air did not vibrate at all. There were no ripples in the sea of magic. This was not a sign that a spell was about to be cast. Instead, it was more like a swindler who pretended to be mysterious. Damn it! Chiara immediately reacted. The dog-headed tutor was not a tutor at all. It was just a liar who lived off others. This kind of charlatan was not uncommon among humans. Some of the country lords were even fooled by them. Chiara's little face could not help but turn red and white. She had just boasted that she was a genius. She did not expect that she would make the same mistake as the country bumpkins that she had always looked down on. The little girl could not help but clench her teeth. She was afraid that she would not be able to control herself and cast a fierce spell on the damn dog-headed tutor. Boris Anvil's legs were also cramping. He knew that there was something behind him. But just when he thought that he was beyond redemption, the dog-headed tutor nodded at him in satisfaction and signaled the other goblins and dog-headed tutors to let them go. What's going on? The dwarf alchemist couldn't help but open his eyes wide. He didn't think that the spells of these girls would be so powerful that they could avoid detection. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. At the same time, he finally had some confidence in the other side's deceptive plan. After the false alarm, the small group did not encounter any more trouble. The dwarf, Boris Anvil, was led by the goblins through the camp and soon saw Lady Shagos. The legendary lizard lady looked like a lizard, but she was also a lizard that walked upright and wore a set of fitted leather armor. When Boris Anvil saw her, she was comforting her mount, an underground multi-legged lizard. The unlucky fellow was obviously not used to the surface environment and looked a little sick. Lady Shagos, dressed in martial attire, was holding a piece of rotten meat with her spear. The latter narrowed her eyes and looked as if she did not care. She finally threw the piece of meat to the side, a little annoyed. Boris Anvil. And the dwarf took a deep breath and nodded nervously. Shagos glanced at him. Where's the proof? Boris Anvil seemed to be prepared. Without saying a word, he took out a metal emblem from his pocket. His precious alchemy materials had been soaked in the water, but the metal emblem itself was not affected. The lizard lady looked at the emblem and confirmed the identity of the dwarf. She then replied, "A count asked me to send you to Golden Pine Castle. Your people will be there to receive you. I can send a small group of underground lizard riders with you, but not too many. They can ensure that you will not be attacked from other sides of Jorgendy Ridge. As for the route, you can choose it yourself. What kind of mount do you need?" Who was a count? Chiara, who was hiding behind the refraction screen, could not help but be startled. There were many counts in the Empire, and there were at least a dozen of them with real power. It was not easy to distinguish them with just one sentence. Their rendezvous point was Golden Pine Castle, which was in the mountains to the west of Asgard. That meant that Jorgendy Ridge had long been prepared to capture Anslois. They even took this into consideration before making this plan, including the escape route if the plan succeeded or failed. The words premeditated came to her mind like a bolt of lightning. She looked at Boris Anvil. He did not seem to know the count, which meant that the person in charge of receiving him was someone else. If it was not to silence him, then it was for the sake of confidentiality. Chiara frowned slightly. It seemed that whether it was for the sake of confidentiality or to silence him, it seemed a little ridiculous to use a count to carry out this mission. Any mount is fine. I will ride a human's horse, the dwarf said vaguely, afraid that he would reveal too much. Fortunately, Shagos was not directly in charge of the dwarf, so she did not see any clues. Shagos nodded. In fact, both of them only knew of each other's existence at the last minute from the higher-ups. Now it was just a meeting between strangers. At this time Chiara, who was racking her brains, did not hear any useful information from the conversation between the two. Finally, she decided to use the second plan. She patted the elf's shoulder gently, which startled the elf and made her look up subconsciously. Perhaps the movement of the two was too big. Shagos, who was talking to the dwarf, suddenly looked up and glanced at the place where the three of them were hiding. "Who is hiding there?" she asked sternly. "Quick, little elf," Chiara shouted at the same time. At this time, the elf had no choice but to make a choice even if she was unwilling. She raised the demon slayer spear in her hand, and with a soft hum, a faint silver light was pointed at Shagos' chest. As soon as she made her move, the three of them immediately appeared from their invisible state. Although the Roman invisibility spell was strange, it was a low circle spell after all. It could not be maintained after the target showed hostility or attack. Shagos, if you don't want to die, don't move and don't make a sound. As soon as Chiara appeared, she immediately threatened the lizard lady not far away, as if she was afraid that the lizard lady would accidentally summon her guards. At that time, whether they would let the elf attack or not was really a problem, but in fact she was thinking too much. The moment Shagos was locked on by the demon slayer spear, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. After all, it was an ancient magic spear that was second only to a subdivine artifact. Moreover, it was a relatively rare ancient weapon that could be used against a single target. Its lethality could even penetrate the defense of some superior demons. How could Shagos be a match for it? After a moment of chill, the lizard lady finally recovered. She looked coldly at the children and then at the dwarf in front of her, as if she had understood something. "Damn it, you traitor!" Boris Anvil was also stunned. This was not what they had agreed on. He glared angrily at the three demons and finally realized that he had been tricked again. "You despicable liars! You can't slander the reputation of a noble lady." "I didn't lie to you," Chiara said disdainfully. Chiara replied disdainfully, "I did ask you to do so, but I didn't mean to force you." "Did I ask you to get information from this female lizard?" "No, I didn't. I just asked you to tell him what happened yesterday. This is in your interest, so you made this choice. As for what we do, that's our freedom. This is all because you're too stupid. We followed you into the camp, but that doesn't mean that you brought us in. You can be recognized because you're too stupid. Rottenwood can't be carved." Boris Anvil was dumbfounded. How could this be? He vaguely felt that there was something wrong with this statement, but it sounded very reasonable. For a moment, he was frozen in place as if he had been petrified. On the other hand, Shagos narrowed her eyes and stared at these little girls. Although she had never been to the surface world, she could still recognize that they were just children. However, it was precisely these hateful brats who were pointing a weapon that she had never seen before at her. Just the aura emitted from it was enough to make her tremble. She had no doubt that as long as she made the slightest move, these hateful brats would be turned into ashes by her. The terrifying aura on the spear was definitely not a lie, but she still hadn't figured out what was going on. Finally, she couldn't help but ask coldly, "Who are you?" "It doesn't matter who we are, Shagos. You just need to know that the spear in her hand is the Demon Slayer spear. Even in the underground of Georgandy Ridge, I think you should have heard of this spear." Chiara patted the elf's shoulder and replied with a smile, "It's actually the Demon Slayer spear." Shagos' expression changed. This spear was once the nightmare of countless demons. It established a great reputation under the Sulphur River. Georgandy Ridge was built on the upper layer of the scorching inferno, and the underground residents often had to deal with demons. As a native there, she naturally wouldn't have heard of this spear. The magic ripples on the spear in the elf's hand were so dense that it couldn't be a counterfeit. She had experienced hundreds of battles in the underground world, so she still had a discerning eye. "What do you want?" Shagos squeezed these words out of his throat. Now that you're our captive, you naturally have to listen to our orders, Chiara replied. You're dreaming. Shagos was so angry that he laughed. If he had to surrender to these little kids, he might as well kill her. What do you want from me? Be straightforward. I don't believe that you dare to kill me, and you won't be able to walk out of this camp. TSK. Chiara saw that she couldn't scare Shagos, so she could only take a step back. She knew that this lizard lady was a lord, and whether it was in terms of knowledge or courage, she was far stronger than the stupid dwarf. We want to confirm some information from you, but I'm more interested in who the Count is. Just for this. Shagos breathed a sigh of relief. At least these naughty kids weren't here for him. I don't know that guy, but I heard people call him Count Rodney in private. She then replied a little angrily, Little guys, you really know how to make a big fuss. This showed the difference between Shagos and Bolly Anvil. Bolly Anvil was unwilling to reveal the people he was involved with, while Shagos did not care at all. Chiara's eyes lit up slightly. Perhaps to others it was just a difference in their personalities, but to her there was a big problem behind it. The key was that Bolly Anvil was obviously an insider. If he leaked the information, it would be considered a betrayal, and he would have to worry about revenge from his comrades. On the other hand, Bolly Anvil was a peripheral member of the plan, so he could sell the information without any psychological burden. This meant that the underground inhabitants of Georgandy Ridge were not completely in the same group as the humans in some aspects. Judging from the tone of the dragon, their cooperation with the humans was probably based on the higher-ups. Chiara vaguely guessed something. She subconsciously bit the tip of her finger and casually retorted, You Georgandy Ridge people are exactly as the rumors say. Selfish and self-centered. You don't even hesitate to make a deal with an enemy like me. It's understandable to act for your own benefit, Shagos replied disapprovingly. This indeed had something to do with her personality as a resident of Georgandy Ridge. Selfishness was the tradition of Georgandy Ridge. One's own safety came first. As for other benefits, they were all exchangeable interests. If the benefits outweighed the risks, she didn't mind cooperating with the enemy. And now, in order to save her life, she didn't mind betraying others. Rodney, Chiara muttered to herself. I think I've heard this name somewhere. That's right. She seemed to have remembered it all of a sudden. Isn't that the good-for-nothing brother of Grand Duchess Arisik? Could this matter have something to do with the Arisik family? Chiara couldn't help but shake her head. Although the family behind the Azure Army was also a powerful force in the Empire, it didn't seem to be strong enough to make the dragons move. Just as she was thinking hard, the Roman suddenly cried out in pain. All of a sudden, a gust of wind swept through the forest, blowing everyone around. When the gust of wind hit, Brando was teaching Haru's magic. Of course, he didn't know any magic himself, but he still had the Wind Empress Saint Tossel and Orthlis in his spiritual world. However, the Wind Empress seemed to have become a little quiet recently. When she wasn't teaching Haru's, she rarely took the initiative to appear. Brando always felt that she was secretly researching something. But no matter how he asked, he couldn't get an answer. It was as if this sage had been like this ever since he found the 2 rings of the Wind Empress from the Hunter Maiden and her brother. Today, the Elf Empress was talking about the basic theory of magic. From the magic triangle, there were 3 basic lines of law: elements, energy, and law. Elements represented the material world of Wond, energy represented the vast sea of magic, and law was the skeleton that formed the world. Martha used these 3 to build the world in the eyes of mortals, which was also the ultimate truth that wizards pursued. Of course, these theories sounded difficult, but for beginner apprentices, they didn't need to understand such complicated knowledge. In fact, they only needed to understand how the lines of law worked in the material world, and it meant that they had truly entered the field of magic. In other words, they could really cast circle spells. Of course, spells like Haru's previous flash of inspiration didn't count. The teaching process was also very simple and crude. In fact, it had almost never changed since Tumen taught magic. To put it simply, it was just repeated practice to simulate the projection of the lines of law on the sea of magic. Haru's spellcasting was still very clumsy. No matter how talented he was, after all, a novice who had been exposed to magic for less than half a year. Brando was patient, correcting his student over and over again. The little prince practiced for a long time until he was sweating profusely. Then he suddenly remembered something. He looked up at his teacher with his light silver eyes and said, "Teacher, Sister Lysimeka said she wants to see you." Lysimeka? Brando was slightly taken aback. He didn't understand why his student would talk about this absent-mindedly. One had to know that he usually did everything with full concentration and would never be distracted for no reason. He was almost startled for a moment before he remembered that this was the name of the Medusa who followed the little prince. "Why is she looking for me?" Sister Lysimeka said she might know why Georgiandi gang invaded the surface world on a large scale. The little prince tried to recall, and then answered word by word seriously. "What?" Brando stood up abruptly. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Haruz was startled. He was timid to begin with, and now he was so scared that he couldn't speak. Seeing this, Brando realized that he had overreacted. But this was indeed a mystery that had been bothering him for a while. The invasion of Georgiandi gang was completely out of line with history. In his understanding, there must be a reason for it, but the surface world had no understanding of the underground world at all, and he couldn't collect any relevant information at all, let alone analyze why this was the case. But he never dreamed that the answer to the mystery was right beside him. Perhaps it was. He took a deep breath and asked, "When did she tell you this?" "Earlier today." Brando was not a fool, and he immediately realized that the Medusa might not have made up her mind to tell this secret, but something must have happened to prompt her to change her mind. From last night to today it seemed that something big had happened, but he thought that the biggest impact on everyone was probably the dragon. Just as he was thinking of Malthus, suddenly, a gust of wind blew in the forest. Brando was fine. The strength of the elemental enlightenment made this sudden gust of wind no different from a breeze to him. But Prince Haruz, who was beside him, was caught off guard and was blown away with a scream. If it weren't for Brando's quick reflexes, who knew how many meters the wind would have blown him away? Thank you," the little prince replied in shock. But Brando looked up at the clear sky and could not help but think, "Is it really that bad? I just thought of that damn dragon and this guy is here?" He was not wrong. The violent airflow descending from the sky was the storm brought about by the dragon's wings. In an instant, two huge shadows flashed in the sky, but the only thing that comforted Brando was that they were not Malthus. The ones flying one after the other were Mithril, whom he had seen last night, and Modesty, who had just flown away. There was even the sharp roar of the female dragon in the air. "Damn bitch, how dare you sneak attack me, I'm going to kill you." Accompanied by this roar, a shadow suddenly pressed down from the sky, and it seemed to be getting bigger and bigger. Brando looked in that direction dumbfounded. A huge creature fell from the sky, falling straight toward where they were. "Damn, no way." P.S. The I in the previous chapter was typed wrongly. Please ignore it. Chapter 948. The giant dragon in midair almost brushed past Brendel and Haruz's sides and crashed to the ground. The airflow raised by the impact blew away the surrounding forest. Cooper and Count Alcon were sent flying by the shock. The others were slightly better, but most of them were swaying left and right. Only Brendel, who was protecting the little prince, stood still. Howren squinted his eyes in the sand and dust brought up by the violent vortex. He only saw a flash of silver light. The one who fell was none other than Mithril, who lured Malthus away last night. Mithril's condition was worse than the worst he had seen her last night. The beautiful silver body of the dragon was covered with wounds of various sizes, and even her scales had become dull. But the most serious wound was near her back. 3 gashes nearly 10 meters long were distributed in that position. The flesh and blood in the wounds were overturned. Broken muscle tissue and blood vessels could be seen at a glance. Dark red blood was gushing out like a fountain. Brando knew at a glance that she did not know who had clawed her. He did not know if it was Malthus or Modesty who was now above him. Most people would probably die if they fell from such a high altitude, but Mithril looked like she was still alive. She raised her head with difficulty, and her silver eyes saw Brando not far away. She could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. "We meet again, little one. I almost thought I was going to break my promise to a mortal." He did not know if his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he saw the corners of her lips curling up into a rare dragon's smile. "Are you all right, Mistress Mithril? How can you still smile at a time like this?" "I'm fine. That idiot Malthus was fooled by my little trick." He's chasing after me in the direction of the highland. Haha. Mithril smiled proudly, and then sighed again. Unfortunately, I'm not so lucky either. Damn Modesty, I don't know what's wrong with her. She actually turned around and flew back. Sigh, if I wasn't in such a bad state, she would be the one falling down now. However, I ambushed her from the clouds so she won't have it easy. Her voice was weak, but she was still proud, as if no one could make her lower her proud head. Brando was not an idiot. He could tell that Mithril did not have the confidence to get rid of Malthus last night. She had risked her life. She was obviously being sarcastic. If she had not gotten rid of Malthus, she would not have been able to return to this place. He could not help but feel inexplicably moved. She was a dragon. Why would she sacrifice herself for a group of mortals she had never met before? In his eyes, the indifference of the Bugas and the loftiness of the giant god Milos seemed to fit the image of a superior being. Legend had it that the silver dragon was the embodiment of holiness, representing the purest kindness and order in the world. But that was just a legend, and it was difficult to reconcile it with the Mithril in front of him. Lady Mithril, do you need help? He asked with some concern. I do need your help, little one, but it's a little different from what you think. Blood continued to seep out of the silver dragon's nostrils. She replied very weakly, if you can do it, I promise you wealth you can't imagine. What? Help me tell the other dragons that Malthus, Modesty, and Glyndwyn have broken their vows. The news of a dragon appearing on the earth would spread in a few days. There was no need to specifically inform them. Besides, where could he find the other dragons? The only way was through Alaz or the little Fatishita, but he could not contact them now. By the time he left Anslova and sent the news back to Tonajul, it would be too late. Was there a need to inform them by then? Brando was slightly startled. The silver dragon Mithril looked into his eyes and seemed to see his doubts. She said softly, the news will indeed spread quickly, but it will be too late by then. We have to send the news out immediately. I'm afraid I can't do that. Brando shook his head. Jorgendy Ridge has sealed off Anslova. We can't leave this place in a short period of time. I'm afraid you have to do it yourself. Lady Mithril, let's get you out of this place first. The rest can wait until you recover. Don't forget, I still have the elapsed needle. Mithril smiled gently. I'm afraid that crazy Modesty won't let me go. She's still angry. Go, I'll stay and help you attract her attention. You go to Lone and take the ship to leave Anslova. The army of Jorgendy Ridge hasn't attacked the port yet. As for how you're going to inform my people as soon as possible, I'll leave it to you. Brando looked up at the female black dragon in the air. Just as Mithril said, she was heavily injured. She was even hit by a draconic spell and her eyes were injured. She was flying in the air like a headless fly, roaring angrily. Unfortunately, any magic effect could not last for too long on a dragon. Once she regained her sight, the silver dragon lady would be in trouble. Looking at this scene, Howren suddenly felt a sense of pride. She won't let us leave, but that doesn't mean we can't. She's just a black dragon. Although I may not be her match, she might not be able to keep me here. Mithril looked at the little human in surprise. He was bragging too much. However, she still admired Brando's courage. Not everyone dared to say such bold words in front of a dragon. She could not help but think of the confrontation between Brando and Malthus last night. What an interesting little fellow. However, the silver dragon lady was not a psychopath who wanted to commit suicide. She did not want to die if she could. Hearing Brando's words, she asked curiously, little fellow, what are you going to do? Brando did not have any good ideas. The only way was to use the gargoyles to hold Modesty back. It sounded a little ridiculous. It would be so under normal circumstances. However, the female black dragon was now injured. Dragons were not very agile in the air, and now she was even more unsteady. If he only used the gargoyles to harass her instead of attacking her directly, he could still waste a lot of her time. It was like a clumsy person swatting a fly. He would not be able to get rid of it in a short time. This choice was to use the gargoyles as cannon fodder. Modesty was not a fool. Only hundreds or even thousands of gargoyles could stop her. However, the gargoyles that were sent out would not come back. Brando's heart was bleeding. These were all the help that he had asked for from the Bugas. Although they were originally used as cannon fodder, He was still very reluctant to give them away. After hearing his words, the silver dragon lady asked with some amusement, "That's a big deal. You're a count, right? Do all human counts have such means?" "That's not it," Brando replied. "It's just that I have a little relationship with the Bugas. I've heard rumors about you. These gargoyles are also precious assets to you. Don't you feel sad?" Mithril asked. After she finished speaking, she saw Brando's expression and could not help but giggle. "I understand. Don't worry, I'll make it up to you, little guy." After hearing this, Brando felt a little better. The dragons were different from the Bugas. As the last golden race in Wone, they had always liked to be alone. They neither established a country nor had any system. Other than the dragons, there were almost no low-level troops. Although there were many wyverns and draconic beasts in this world, most of them did not have a superior or subordinate relationship with the dragons. When Mithril said that she would make it up to him, it was mostly through her personal collection and treasures. Unfortunately, the gargoyles of the Bugas were not something that could be bought with money. Rare troops were sometimes much more useful than wealth and magic treasures. However, compensation was better than no compensation. At least it could be used as a psychological comfort. "Can you turn into a human?" Brando asked. "Lady Mithril, I can only turn into a silver elf. I don't like to turn into a human." "That's fine too." Brando could not help but laugh. Even at this time, she still did not forget to joke around. He really did not know whether this was the natural calmness of dragons or the latter's strange personality. At this time, Modesty, who was in midair, seemed to have finally regained her vision. Although she was still circling in the air mindlessly, she roared, "Mithril, you're going to regret this soon." Without further ado, Brando immediately sent an order to the gargoyles hiding in the forest. Suddenly, countless small black dots appeared between the hills and mountains. These small black dots were all gargoyles. Under Brando's order, they screamed and flew towards Modesty in the air. The blind black dragon was completely unaware, but countless goblins and kobolds in Shago's camp below witnessed this scene with their own eyes. They could not help but scream in fear. Hearing these chaotic screams, Modesty finally realized that something was wrong. She screamed angrily, "What happened, Shagos? Report to me." But could Lady Shagos report to her? Obviously not. The one who reported to her was the little elf. A faint silver light rose from Shagos' camp, and in an instant, a white light flashed towards Modesty in midair. Brando's eyelids twitched when he saw this silver light. These little girls were too lawless. How dare they attack a dragon? Did they really think that his words were not in their ears? However, Brando had actually wronged the little elf. When Mithril fell from the sky, the airflow swept across the entire camp of the lizardmen and kobolds. The little elf who was pointing the demon slayer spear at Lady Lizardman was directly blown away. Chiara, who was too weak to stand up to the wind, crashed into the Roman. Both of them rolled out together. Only Chiara was the quickest. She flew up immediately and escaped the disaster. Shagos, who was still happily making a deal with Chiara, suddenly let out a low growl. She shot towards the little elf and grabbed the demon slayer spear in the little elf's hand. She wanted to take away the only weapon that could threaten her. Shagos originally thought that the little girl would not have much strength. Moreover, she could tell that the little elf was very weak from the way she was blown away by the wind. However, Shagos did not expect that she would not be able to snatch the demon slayer spear from the little elf's hand. Instead, she lifted the little elf up along with the spear. "Don't take my treasure." Ba, 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 ba. The little elf was still eating the sand in the wind as she shouted. At that moment, the lizard lady's mind was in a mess. What kind of obsession was this? She was so angry that smoke was coming out of her 7 orifices. She raised her foot and wanted to kick the little elf out. "Get out of my way, damn brat." However, the little elf was also stubborn. She directly activated the demon slayer spear. At that moment, a beam of white light shot out from the spear. As the two fought, the tip of the spear moved horizontally in the direction of the camp by 50 to 60 degrees. Then the beam of white light sliced through the entire camp. After the white light passed by, the entire forest seemed to have been shaved bald. The tents on the open ground collapsed and caught fire. For a moment black smoke billowed. The goblins and kobolds were crying and howling in the smoke. In fact, many of them were already dead. The little elf closed her eyes tightly and did not see this scene at all. However, Shagos himself was shocked. These were all his own troops. In Jorgendi Ridge, the troops under his command were the symbol of a lord's strength. Just this one attack had caused him to suffer heavy losses. She could not help but feel regretful and anxious. Subconsciously, she raised the spear in the little elf's hand into the sky. However, she did not expect that this move would cause problems. At that moment, everyone saw a beam of white light rise from the ground and go straight to Modesty in the air. Under everyone's watchful eyes, this beam of white light hit Modesty's wings. A golden red line of law flashed out from where the beam of light hit. The white beam of light also turned into hot molten steel, sprinkling a rain of light. The demon slayer spear could not penetrate the dragon's defense, but it was enough to hurt her. The female black dragon was already blind and anxious. She hovered in the air because she was afraid that she would hit the mountain if she flew too low. She did not expect to suddenly feel a sharp pain in her left wing where the damn woman had attacked. She could not help but scream, lost her balance, and crashed into a nearby hill. Shagos watched as Modesty was shot down by herself and fell into the valley with a loud bang. The lizard lady was stunned for a moment. She was not afraid of the little elf, but she could not be afraid of an angry dragon. At that moment, her brain seemed to have been crushed by an elephant. Her mind was blank. The most terrifying thing she could imagine in her entire life could not be compared to this scene in front of her. She had actually shot down one of the 3 most terrifying underground city lords in Jorgendi Ridge. The clouds of death shrouded her head in an instant. She was so scared that she even forgot about the battle around her. She loosened her grip and let the little elf jump down from her hand. The little elf was already scared out of her wits. She hurriedly ran to Shani and shouted, "Shani, let's run!" This shout immediately woke Shagos up. When she saw that the culprit behind all this was trying to slip away under her nose, she almost went crazy with anger. She immediately took out a short bow from under her cloak, nocked an arrow, and shot an arrow at the little elf. "Behind you!" Shani screamed. The little elf turned her head and stared blankly at the arrow flying towards her. She was so scared that she didn't have the mind to dodge it. However, the arrow that was sure to hit her flew past her cheek. Then she saw the bad woman named Chiara dancing at her not far away. "Run, little elf." So she was also a good person, the little elf thought in a daze. This scene was completely different from what Shagos saw. She saw her arrow hitting the little elf's head. The little elf fell to the ground, but a moment later, her body disappeared. Shagos was stunned for a moment. Then she realized something and roared, "Damn it! It's an illusion!" She did not have time to find out who was casting the spell around her. In her fury, Shagos had already lost her mind. She immediately threw away the short bow, took out a pair of scimitars from her waist, and chased after the little elf. After all, the little elf was not even iron-ranked. There was no way she could outrun Shagos, who had been through hundreds of battles under Jorgendi Ridge. The lizard lady caught up with the little elf in a moment and raised her scimitar to slash at the little elf. She thought that the little girl would not be able to dodge the attack, but she did not expect that a huge force suddenly came from the blade. Shagos only had time to see a long line of sparks in the dust rolled up by the wind. The scimitar in her hand flew out of her hand as if it was out of her control and flew far away. She raised her head in a daze, only to discover that the little elf had unknowingly hidden behind a human male, and that human was pointing a black sword at her. "Earth!" Shakatha's eyes widened. Before he could finish his sentence, he watched as the sword pierced his throat. The latter half of his sentence turned into a meaningless gurgling sound. His slanted pupils constricted slightly, and he fell limp to the ground. Chiara caught up from behind and saw Brando grabbing the little elf's arm. She frowned slightly and complained angrily, "Why did you kill Shagos? She knows a lot of information." "This is Shagos?" Brando was also slightly stunned. He thought that it was just an ordinary lizardman soldier. But this thought flashed through his mind, and he did not feel that it was a pity. He killed the little elf after seeing the beam of light. Now that Modesty had crashed into the mountain, it was the best time to escape. He immediately put the earth ring back into the dimensional hole and asked Chiara, "Where's the Roman?" "I am here, Brando." The merchant girl finally caught up with him, panting. Brando glared at her, but he did not have time to explain too much. He said directly, "Come with me, we have to leave this place immediately." "What?" Chiara almost jumped up. "We didn't rest for the whole night." "It's okay, you can rest under the dragon's nose," Brando replied unhappily. Sigh. The little lady of House Cipher could not help but sigh. She glared at the little elf and said, "It's all your fault." "Why is it the little elf's fault?" The little elf retorted, feeling wronged. Oh. Chapter 949. After Modesty crashed into the mountain, the wind howled above the forest, and in a moment, the pungent smell of sulfur filled the air. Visible sparks floated in the air, and these sparks fell on the canopy of the trees, forming bright flames. The temperature was rising steadily. After Brando finished speaking to the three ladies, he grabbed Roman's hand and led them out of the camp. The camp was now in chaos. Without Shago's command, the goblins and kobolds were like headless flies, screaming and running around in the camp. Brando held Roman's hand and walked in front. The little elf hesitated for a while whether to follow them or not. At this time, Shagos, who was lying in a pool of blood, suddenly moved his arm reflexively. She screamed in fright and hurriedly carried Shani and chased after them. Chiara walked at the back of the group. She saw that after Shagos fell to the ground, the magic equipment on his body disintegrated along with the loss of magic, but there was still an ivy-shaped ring shining. She quickly took off the ring, then went around the corpse and followed. In the end, only the dwarf remained frozen in place. Boris Anvil had witnessed many things happen in a short period of time. He stared blankly for a moment before his expression suddenly changed. And for some unknown reason, he hurriedly chased after the dwarf. The four of them passed through the camp one after another. Roman's hand was in Brando's hand, so she had to keep up with him in a panic. At first, she was still able to mutter a few words. "Brando, you're walking too fast. I can't keep up." When Brando heard her, he directly carried the merchant girl on his back like a rice bag. The latter screamed in fright. Before she could react, the scenery around her suddenly changed, and Brando was already carrying the two Lolas, Chiara and the little elf, and then flashed into the forest. "Don't carry me like a rice bag. Put me down, you bad guy." The other two immediately protested and punched and kicked Brando, but it was useless. Their short legs could not kick Brando at all. Modesty finally woke up, shaking her huge head as she climbed out of the huge pit she made. She swooped down from a height of hundreds of meters and hit her head on a nearby cliff, making herself dizzy. Although she looked terrible, in fact, she did not suffer any serious damage. The cliff, on the other hand, was very unlucky as it had completely collapsed. From the outside it looked like a large-scale landslide. Modesty's dizzy vision suddenly became clear, and it also meant that Mithril's spell had finally failed. She could see the forest bathed in fire and the chaotic camp at the bottom of the mountain. She could not help but roar to the sky. Who attacked me? Come out now." Of course, Shagos could not answer this question, and the elf was trembling in fear in Brando's hand. A shadow suddenly blocked the sky above the forest. The black dragon had already climbed to the top of the mountain. She finally saw Brando and the others fleeing in the forest, and further away, the other humans fleeing in all directions in the hills. Among them, she sensed a very familiar presence. Mithril. Modesty roared with suppressed anger from the depths of her throat. She raised her head high and spat out a huge fireball from her mouth, shooting it toward the distant mountain. The fireball rolled over the forest. There were still many Cruz nobles in the forest, and they were about to be killed. But at this time, a beautiful silver line suddenly flashed above the canopy of the forest. The silver line emitted a dazzling light under the impact of the fireball, but in the end, it changed the direction of the fireball, causing it to roll over the treetops and fly over everyone's heads. It was a false alarm. All of this happened in an instant. In the end, it seemed that only a long sea of fire was left behind in the wake of the fireball. Mithril blocked the attack and could not help but look even more defeated. She had already transformed back into her human form, the elf lady in the white robe. She looked at the stunned nobles around her, frowned, and gestured to them to run. Obviously, Modesty would not let her go so easily. The black dragon stood on top of the mountain, and the whole hill was like a small mound under her feet. She opened her upper and lower jaws, and a new golden flame was brewing between them. Apparently, Modesty was preparing to launch a second fireball. She narrowed her eyes. She knew very well that the bitch Mithril would not be able to survive this attack with her current injuries. Just as Modesty was about to launch an attack, a squeaking sound suddenly echoed in the mountains. Modesty turned around in surprise and saw countless gargoyles rising from the hills. They were flying in her direction. Modesty could not help but be startled. If she did not want to, she could just ignore the gargoyles. Even if she stood there and did not fight back, these gargoyles might not hurt her at all. But there were too many gargoyles in front of her. Even Modesty did not expect there to be so many gargoyles hiding in the hills. They were like a flock of buzzing flies, and anyone would be flustered when faced with them. Modesty was shocked. She subconsciously spat out the flames in her mouth. The flames drowned half of the gargoyles in the sky in a sea of fire. Gargoyles were magic puppets directly under Brando's control. When the flames from Modesty's mouth came crashing down, Brando only saw a red warning message in the system log. He turned around and saw countless black dots falling from Modesty's fire cloud. For a moment it looked like it was raining, and the remains of the gargoyles fell in the valley. Brando felt that he had lost contact with at least a large group of gargoyles. This was not like the battle between the gargoyles and the dragon last night. This was a direct battle with the dragon, and the loss was only because he deliberately scattered them. But even so, it still made his heart ache. Maynard soon appeared in front of him. She stood in the forest on the hillside and gestured to Brando, meaning, "What should we do now?" Brando immediately told her in sign language. Split up. This was the only way to survive. No matter how terrifying Modesty was, she was only one dragon. What he needed to do now was to lure the bad-tempered female dragon away. There were too many people in the envoy group. He could not take care of everyone while being chased by the black dragon, especially the descendants of the nobles and Princess Magadol. Their fighting strength was only slightly better than the commoners. If he was not careful, he could die in the sea of fire. But he was alone, a small target, and it would be easier for him to shake off Modesty's pursuit. What he needed to do now was to attract the attention of the black dragon and divert her anger from Mithril. And there was a ready-made way. Brando raised his hand and shouted to the elf, "Do you see that dragon? Shoot her." The elf looked at the shadow of the dragon that was bigger than a mountain in panic. Her face turned pale and she quickly shook her head. "If you don't shoot her, she will kill us. Dragons have excellent eyesight. She will find us immediately." Brando had already expected the elf's reaction and immediately comforted her. "Don't be afraid. If we work together, she will not be able to defeat us." The little elf doubtfully asked, "Really?" "Of course it's real. It's more real than a pearl." Then what should I do?" The little girl immediately regained some confidence and stuttered, "Should I aim for her head?" "Oh, Mother said that the dragon's weakness is her abdomen." "I'll aim for her abdomen. It's the same no matter where you hit." Chiara and the elf were being carried together and were very annoyed. At this moment Chiara said unhappily, "Anyway, just hit her quickly. Don't let her continue to spit fire at those gargoyles." Chiara immediately guessed Brando's idea. Modesty was spitting fire at the annoying flies in the sky one after another. It had to be said that this attack method was very effective against the scattered gargoyles. Every time she spat fire, countless gargoyles would be burned and fall from the sky. If this continued, she would be able to clean up all the gargoyles in a moment and then catch up with Brando and the others who were running away, brutally killing everyone. After all, no matter how fast the people on the ground ran, they could not be faster than a dragon in the sky. And just as a brand new ball of golden flame was being bred in her mouth, a reflection suddenly flashed across the edge of the ink-black graphite ball's eyes. Modesty's reaction was very quick. She subconsciously turned her head sideways and a white light flew past her horn. "Hey, you are quite accurate." Chiara, who was being carried by Brando, turned her head sideways and saw the elf's attack. She could not help but praise. It was so far away, just a little bit more. The elf's face turned red, and Shienni, who was holding tightly onto Brando's cloak and being swung around, could not help but laugh. However, neither of them said that she was actually aiming at Modesty's abdomen. Although the shot did not hit, the black dragon lady was already furious. She had already identified that this was the same attack that had sneaked up on her before. And that sneak attack made her even angrier than Mithril's sneak attack on her. Can you imagine the ugliness of a dragon soaring in the sky crashing into a mountain? When she thought of so many lowly creatures witnessing this scene with their own eyes, she could not help but want to kill all the creatures present, especially the culprit. And now she finally found the culprit. Damn vermin, I'll let you run. Let's see where you can run to. Modesty flapped her wings and blew the gargoyles around her away. She was about to fly in the direction of Brando, but at that moment, the gargoyles in the sky turned around in the violent airflow and flew towards her together, as if they did not care about their lives. They gathered into a black cloud and rushed towards her face. This time Modesty had to stop spreading her wings. No matter how angry she was, she could not let a group of flies hit her head head-on. Not to mention how embarrassing that feeling was, just the disgust alone was unbearable. She roared angrily, "Damn flies, get away from me!" Then she opened her mouth, and a golden flame gushed out from her throat. The gargoyles had already gathered together, and she only needed to breathe fire to clean up these annoying flies. But at that moment Modesty's expression changed, and she had to shut her mouth. A reflection flashed in her dark eyes, and a white light suddenly burst out from the forest in the distance. This white light passed through the gargoyles in the sky and hit her right in the face. Roar! Ms. Black Dragon had probably never experienced such pain and humiliation in her life. Although the attack of the Demon Slayer spear might not hurt her at all, this shot really hurt her. She was in so much pain and anxiety that she almost cried. If the anger in her heart could kill at this moment, Brendel and the little elf would have turned into ashes long ago. Not even their bones would be left behind. Modesty let out a terrible cry of pain. She no longer cared about her face and directly spread her huge wings in the direction of Brendel. As for the gargoyles that were harassing her, they were directly knocked away by her, smashed into pieces or blown away by the strong wind. Ms. Black Dragon was completely in a rage. She had long forgotten about Mithril and the secrets of the dragon race. Now she only had one goal, and that was to crush those vermin who dared to ridicule her into powder. "She's flying over." The Roman who was carried on Brando's back shouted in fear and joy. "That dragon!" Brendel praised her in his heart. Although this little lowly was muddle-headed, her skills were not at all vague. It would not be easy to hit Modesty at this distance, not to mention that she was being carried in her hands and was jolting violently. After 2 shots, the aggro level went straight to 100%. Modesty was a master at luring monsters, and all the major guilds would fight to hire him as their chief luring hunter. When Wisp saw that her second shot had accurately hit the black dragon's head, she carefully looked in that direction. When she saw Modesty spread her huge wings and flew up, she knew that she had been fooled again. She could not hit the dragon at all. This time the dragon was going to eat them. Wisp was going to become the evil female dragon's dinner. Wisp could not help but cry. She was crying so hard that it sounded as if she had been washed clean and served with onions and spices. "Don't cry, I'm still here. She won't be able to catch up to us." Brendel couldn't bear to see her crying like this. She was still a child after all, so he coaxed her again. "Don't cry, I'm still here." "Liar, you're a bad person. I don't believe you anymore," sob sob sob. The more the Wisp thought about it, the sadder she became. She could not help but cry. Damn. Brando did not expect that he would suffer the consequences of his own actions. It was fine if this little girl did not believe him, but with her crying, how could he attack later? He still had to rely on the Demon Slayer spear in her hand. After all, it was the only weapon that could threaten Modesty. Fortunately, at this time Romaine finally played her role. She praised loudly. "Wisp, you hit her so accurately. You must have hurt her. Look at her flustered and exasperated face. Ah, she's coming." The Roman screamed, and so did the little Wisp. Modesty was already above them in the blink of an eye. The black dragon spread her wings, and the wind pressure almost made Brando tumble. He had intentionally deviated from the diplomatic party's direction, and was now in between a mountain pass. The dragon flew between 2 mountain peaks, and the little Wisp, who was in Brando's hand, did not have the time to cry. When the dragon swooped down at them, she screamed and raised the Demon Slayer spear in her hand, like a machine gun, and fired at Modesty. This time Modesty was unlucky. She never dreamed that the damn spear could shoot continuously. In fact, Brando did not expect it, and he guessed that even the little wisp in his hand did not expect it. Dozens of light beams instantly shot at the dragon in midair. At that moment, Modesty tried her best to dodge, but she still took no less than 7 shots. Although none of the attacks managed to penetrate her defenses, the pain almost caused her to black out and she fell from the sky. It took her a lot of effort to stabilize her body, and then she tried to rise up again in vain. Several people in the valley watched this scene happen. The little elf was stunned for a while before she shouted, "Damn lizard, the little elf is here for revenge." Then she raised the Demon Slayer spear and fired at the flying Modesty. The latter was shot several times in the back. She twitched in the air for a while and did not fall directly. Modesty was about to go crazy. Ever since she was born, she had never been teased like this, not to mention that the people who teased her were just lowly mortals. She gritted her teeth and climbed to the highest point again. Then she turned back and roared into the valley again. At this moment there was only one thought in her mind. No matter what, she had to kill those hateful insects. Even if she had to crash into them, she had to smash them into meat paste. The little wisp saw the black dragon turn around in midair and pounce on them again. This time she was not afraid at all. She licked her lips, raised the Demon Slayer spear, and fired a round of crazy shots at Modesty, who was flying over. But no one noticed that the patterns engraved on the silver spear in the little wisp's hand were shining layer by layer with golden light. At this moment, everyone was staring at the dragon in the sky. When the patterns on the Demon Slayer spear finally shone, Chiara, who was in Brando's hand, finally noticed this scene because of the dazzling light. When she saw the shining spear in the little wisp's hand, she was almost scared out of her wits. She immediately shouted at the top of her lungs, "Stop, you idiot!" Unfortunately, it was still a little too late. With a loud bang, the whole valley suddenly shook. A dazzling white light spread in all directions with Brando as the center, sweeping across the whole valley in an instant. After the explosion, the 4 people present were safe and sound, but the little wisp was stunned as she looked at the 2 larger fragments in her hand. A moment ago, they could still call this thing the Demon Slayer spear. Above their heads, the dragon gnashed its teeth and roared. Chapter 950. The Demon Slayer spear had exploded. The explosion produced a huge positive energy wave that spread out from the valley like a supernova explosion. This positive energy wave was like a super large area of effect healing. Although it did not cause any damage, it shocked everyone on the scene. Modesty, who was in midair, was stunned for a moment before she realized what had happened. She laughed shrilly in the air. "Haha, you damn idiots, what can you rely on now? Enjoy the taste of despair." With a high-pitched laugh, the dragon spread her wings and swooped down from the sky. Brando only heard a sonic boom coming from above his head. He could not help but feel his scalp tingle. He did not even have time to look up at Modesty's position because he only had a moment to react. He had to judge the direction of the dragon's dive through the sound. His past experience seemed to have sharpened his senses 1,000 times. It was not that he had not fought against a dragon before. It was just that it was not in this world. Brando carried the Roman on his shoulder and carried the elf and Chiara in his hands. He suddenly swooped forward. The sonic boom caused by the dive swept across the valley, like the sound of a bayonet splitting the air. The sharp blade brushed past Brando's body. Almost at the same time, Modesty's sharp claws swept across the place, leaving behind a dazzling golden flame mark in the air. Brando had already rolled on the ground and drilled into the nearby forest. The elf and Chiara were stunned. They opened their mouths wide, probably thinking that they were dead. When Brando got up from the ground and dragged them deeper into the forest, the 2 little Lolas screamed in fear. "Ah! You, how did you dodge it?" "Consciousness," Brando replied, gritting his teeth. In fact, it was not just the 2 Lolas. Even Modesty herself could not believe that her surefire dive had missed its target. She flew high into the sky with a series of wild laughter. When she looked back to see what she had done, she found that there was nothing in the valley. The black dragon's laughter came to an abrupt end. If one could see her face at this time, it would be terrible. The female black dragon roared, turned in the air again, and swooped down between the hills. The pressure once again descended from above. Brando felt that Modesty behind him was much more cautious this time. She was tightly locking onto his escape route. It was impossible to take the initiative like before. "Brando, she's coming again," Roman, who was carried on his shoulder, shouted. There was not much fear in his voice. Even Brando felt that this guy was too heartless. The current situation was a little too exciting for him. He felt his heart pounding in his chest. If he made a wrong decision, everyone would die in the dragon's stomach. However, the merchant girl seemed to have a blind faith in him, as if she was not worried that he would fail. "She's coming." Accompanied by her scream, the black dragon once again approached her from behind. Because the speed was too fast, the sound even began to distort. For the first time, the speed of Modesty's dive exceeded the speed of sound waves in the air. The dragon's wings seemed to have cut through an invisible barrier, and the airflow in front of her compressed into a white cloud. In the blink of an eye, she was left behind by Modesty. Brando could almost feel the needle-like feeling on his back. He put his hand into his pocket. In just a moment, Modesty flew past, and the cloud of fire fell on the forest, burning it instantly. She thought she had caught Brando, but when she looked up again, her claws were still empty. "This is impossible." A roar spread far and wide to the hills and forests within a radius of dozens of miles. Almost everyone could clearly hear the angry roar of the giant dragon in the air. Maynard led the diplomatic party through the forest. When she heard the roar, she suddenly stopped and looked back at the silver dragon lady Mithril, who was at the back of the party. Mithril, who was wearing a white robe, was also looking up in that direction. Her expression was very bad, but her silver eyes were filled with a playful look. Modesty was known for her bad temper in the dragon race, but that did not mean she was a fool. There were many people in the dragon race who could toy with her, but outside of the dragon race, this was the first person she had seen. "Is Brando doing well?" Maynard paused for a moment and suddenly asked. Mithril shook her head, then nodded and replied softly, "Maybe not too good, but maybe not too bad. Alaz has a good eye." "You know the leader, Lady Mithril?" Enide asked in surprise. The silver dragon's transformation caused such a huge commotion that it was impossible to hide it from others. At this moment, almost everyone in the diplomatic party knew her true identity. That was why they were surprised. Although there was a rumor that Count Tonajul was related to the dragon race, it was rumored that it was only a young dragon. But the one in front of them was clearly a real adult dragon. Mithril smiled weakly at the curious humans. "I can only say that I have heard of him. Is the Count very famous, big sister?" The young daughter of the Grand Duke of Grimoires asked in a childish voice. Almost everyone could not help but smile bitterly when they heard this innocent question. Brando was indeed famous. Even if it was not before, but after this diplomatic mission, he was notorious, whether it was for the Cruz Empire or the Erewhon nobles. If it was not for this sudden war, he would have become the public enemy of all the nobles in the empire south of Anzaruta. And in the court, he had also offended a lot of powerful officials, led by Duke Palat. It was even said that Her Majesty the Queen had a lot of complaints about him. The empire's complaints were simply earth-shattering for the nobles of the Erewhon. Before this diplomatic mission, no one would have thought that there was someone in this world who could cause so much trouble. In fact, in the Erewhon Empire, according to Oberway, Makarov was very regretful. He felt that it was the stupidest decision he had ever made in his life to let Brando go to Cruz as the leader of the diplomatic mission. The answer to this question was obvious, but everyone, including the nobles of Cruz, still stared at Mithril. After all, no one would not be curious about a real dragon's opinion, especially their opinion of humans. The silver dragon smiled and touched Judy's hair. She coughed twice and said, "He is indeed very famous." Everyone was a little stunned. Fame in human society was not worth mentioning in the eyes of the golden race. It was an almost eternal gaze. Power and vanity were like rotten wood in front of such a gaze. But Mithril gave a definite answer. Everyone thought that the silver dragon lady was coaxing a child, although they did not know if dragons would coax human children. Then Mithril continued, "I have heard some rumors about him. He is indeed related to us. I know that is rare among you humans. But not only that, I know that he has met William. He has a very good reputation among those people. Tumen and William both have high hopes for him." Tumen and William. Eugenie almost jumped up. You mean the Silver Storm William of Buga? More or less that young man, Mithril replied. Oh, he is not young anymore. Bugas are immortal, but they will eventually grow old. Everyone present could not help but clatter their teeth when they heard this. Although Tumen was Erewhon, his legend did not stop in Erewhon. People knew him better by another name, the master of the Mithril fortress. Not to mention William, that name had become a godlike existence for nearly 1,000 years. There were countless legends about him in Wound. The Cruise people in the forest could not help but change their expressions. They only knew that their opponent was a country bumpkin from Erewhon, but they did not expect that the other party was related to the Bugas. And it was not just a normal connection. Although they knew that Brando had the support of the Bugas, everyone took it for granted that it was the support of the Bugas for Erewhon. The reason was simple, because of the Azure Lance. But no one would have thought that the truth of this support turned out to be a one-sided support for Brando. Of course, they could hear that Mithril's tone was full of admiration. The Silver Dragon Lady was speaking up for the Count. What kind of concept was that? For a moment, the Cruise people present suddenly felt at ease. No wonder the Count was so powerful, no wonder he dared to challenge the Empire. It turned out that he was backed by the Bugas. Everything made sense now. Sir Cooper and Earl Alcorn, who was beside him, looked at each other, and the same thought could be read in both of their eyes. They seemed to have done something that could not have been more stupid. But the Silver Dragon Lady did not finish her words. She smiled and said, "You probably think that the Count is backed by the Bugas?" She shook her head. "You are wrong. He treats the Bugas as friends and will never easily owe them a favor. His real ally is the Ring of the World. You may not know how high your Count's reputation is among the Druids. The great Druids of the Ring of the Sky may not be comparable to his current status." The forest was silent for a moment. Druids. If the Bugas still had the legends of Wound, then the Druids would have long been a group of people who still existed in those illusory stories. Everyone knew that they really existed and existed at the border of the Black Forest. This group of wilderness people who guarded the border of the civilized world. No one knew exactly how powerful they were. The whole of Eloranta was just a part of the Ring of the World, the country that was still looked after by the Wise Ones, the home of the earth and mountains, nature and forests. Almost all humans knew that Eloranta rarely got involved in the affairs of the mortal world. Only the kingdom of the Wild Elves would participate in the Holy War. And those real high-end forces, together with the Druids, had not appeared in this world for nearly 1,000 years. And that was the Ring of the World. Some people even thought that they were already the Silver People. After the Bugas, after the Silver Elves, the last descendants of the Silver People born in the world of Wound since the Age of Mortals. They turned out to be the Count's allies. As for Brando's identity, in fact, since he became famous, whether it was the Empire or Erewhon, countless people had speculated. Some guessed that he was a Wind Elf because he had the Wind Archers and the White Lion Guards, but some guessed that he was a Templar because it was said that someone had seen this lord use the armor of heaven. Some guessed that he was a dragon, and the reason was self-evident. Even about the Bugas, there were rumors, after all, that he had the Azure Lance and so many gargoyles in his hands. But no one would have thought that Brando's allies were the Druids. Mithril made it very clear that the relationship between the Druids and him was that of an ally, and between the two of them, the status of the Count of Tonagel seemed to be higher. Everyone seemed to feel a little confused for a moment. Evram, who was covered in flesh, even slapped his face hard to confirm that he was not dreaming. Among everyone, only Brando's original subordinates were not surprised. Yuta even frowned, because she felt that this silver dragon was clearly exposing her master's background. There were several times when she wanted to go up and stop her, if it was not for Medisha who held her back. The Silver Elf Princess slowly shook her head at the former. She stared in that direction, feeling very curious, but after all, her thoughts were different from Yuta's. She felt a little strange that the Silver Dragon Lady was actually helping the Count to brag. She did not understand why the other party would do so, but at least she knew that her Count, whether it was in Bugas or the Ring of the World, was definitely not as respected as Mithril made it out to be. Moreover, the sly light that flashed in the Silver Dragon Lady's eyes from time to time did not escape her eyes. And from the other party's narration, she could clearly feel that the nobles of Cruz and the other people in the envoy group had a subtle change in their attitude towards their Count. They were originally just a temporary gathering, but now their reliance on their count had further changed, and they had a lot of confidence in their count. Medisha was even sure that these people's trust towards Brando was only temporary, but now it had obviously stabilized. She could predict that even after the end of this war, most of them would remember Brando's kindness to them. Humans were such a strange kind of creatures, and their instinct was to seek profit. But the question was, why would a giant dragon speak up for its lord for no reason? Medisha looked at Mithril with a strange expression. She knew very well how prideful this race was. In their eyes, humans were absolutely beneath them. She frowned and suddenly turned her head to the side and asked the Shire, "Did the Count tell us to support him?" The Shire shook his head slightly. At this moment, Brando really did not need support. In fact, he had led Modesty for at least a dozen miles. One of them was running in the forest, while the other was chasing in the air. During this time, the black dragon roared and swooped down countless times, but the problem was that she missed every time. She was about to go crazy because she still couldn't figure out what kind of trick the other party used to avoid her attack. Now, she was sure that the other party definitely didn't rely on some *T skill. He must have some strange magic equipment on him that could avoid her attack. In fact, Modesty had already guessed most of it. Every time she swooped down to Brando's side, she would feel a slight distortion in time, and then the other party would inexplicably run a step faster, causing her to miss. No matter how she calculated in advance or what kind of magic she used, in the end it was useless in the end. And the only result was, she found that the abominable human below seemed to be beginning to weaken. But it's not like I'm really weak. Instead, he lost a level. Of course, he was relying on the elapsing needle to avoid Modesty's pursuit. As long as the black dragon swooped close to him, he would activate the elapsing needle for a moment to speed up a step or turn in a direction. With 10 times the time acceleration, no matter how terrifying the black dragon lady was, she could not catch him. But the only problem was the loss of experience. He had used the elapsing needle as sparingly as possible, but as time passed, he could not avoid losing a level. This was the first level. After that, it would get faster and faster. He could predict that if he continued running at this speed, he would lose a level and a half in the next 10 miles. And by the evening, not to mention his stamina, the level of the Frost Soil Guard would be the first thing he would lose. However, Brando was not in a hurry. He was not familiar with the Empire, and had never been to Anslova, but he had heard of some places nearby. There were 2 smaller dungeons in the game in the Silver Gushing Valley. These 2 dungeons were not useful for his escape, but he knew that there was an entrance to Jorgendy Ridge between the 2 dungeons. That entrance was more special, and he believed that he should be able to escape the pursuit of this damned black dragon there. If he was not wrong, that place should be half an hour away from here, which meant that he would lose another 2 or 3 levels. At the thought of this, Brando felt very unhappy. But at this time, Kiara, who was in his hand, was even more unhappy. The whistling cold wind was about to freeze her face, but she could not throw a tantrum. After all, there was a dragon chasing after them. If she wanted to stay and be the dragon's dinner, the abominable fellow who was holding her would not mind. In order to prevent herself from being frozen, the little lady had to find a topic to talk about. Why did the demon slayer spear explode? She asked with a trembling voice.